Welcome back everyone. Today I've got a bit of a special video prepared. We're going to be covering everything you need to know about being auto-filled into all 5 positions. But because my brain is just full of top lane knowledge, I've assembled the coaching exodia, so a coach from each role, and they're going to be covering their respective positions. So feel free to skip ahead. I'm going to be timestamping everything down below. You can skip to the roles that you feel like you need the most help with, and this will apply to everybody. It doesn't matter if you're a top laner getting filled AD carry, jungle getting filled support. We're going to be setting each of us for our role, clear structure and guidelines, recommended champs, everything you need to know to be as impactful as possible and clear up any confusion for somebody who's not used to playing that role. So again, feel free to skip ahead. I'll also be covering some guidelines and some points to keep in mind if you're getting filled in any position, just some general advice. So skip to whatever you feel is relevant to you, and let's get started. Hey everyone, if you're passionate about improving and leveling up your gameplay, I've been offering coaching classes for 5 days a week for quite some time, and just seen firsthand how much my students have been improving across all different elo brackets. How it works is you'll come to a class with a VOD like reviewed, and I'm going to help you with your early game, your mid game, or anything you feel like needs improving. And if you're unsure, then I'm going to steer you in the right direction by setting clear learning objectives. Link's going to be in the description, I hope to see you there, but if not, then enjoy the video. Now, before we get started on how to play each role specifically, I want to give some general advice for what to do before you get autofilled. So the preparation I want you to make before you get placed in that uncomfortable position. And the first one's going to be mainly based around your champion pool, where I strongly recommend picking one champion from each role and committing to it. Don't try to pick the best champion for the situation if you don't have that champ mastery, where let's say you're a top laner, you get filled support, and your ADC picks a Lucian, you're like, oh, Lucian Nami looks pretty good in pro play, but you've played Nami maybe twice in your life in ARAM, you're probably going to feed. So it's really important that you pick a champion ahead of time, and there's a lot of bonus points if you already have champ mastery on that champ if it's one from your roles. So if you're a top getting filled support, I've been playing a lot of Poppy recently when I get filled support, I've already got that champ mastery, or if you get filled jungle, you can play Olaf. And a bit of a story there, back when I went to NA for a year, every time I got filled jungle, I played Olaf because I already had champ mastery on Olaf top, and I just mastered the clear. In practice tool, looked up a clear, looked up a build, and I just knew the build, the clear, the general game plan, and I had an over 72-75% win rate on jungle Olaf, where if I queued up main role jungle, that probably wouldn't have been the case. But if you get autofilled, I do feel like most of the time you are in a better position. Your teammates do feel a little bit better. I don't know how true that is, that's just my experience. And because I was able to perform very consistently, and I'd say a pretty easy way, because I just learned the build, the clear, the runes, everything is very consistent, I was able to do quite well when I was getting autofilled. So if you can play champion from your role, so if you get filled mid as a jungle, maybe you play Brand if you played him the split, or if you get filled top as AD carry, you can play Zeri or Vayne, and I can't believe I'm saying that, please don't play that against me. But if you can play a champion you already have a bunch of champ mastery on, that makes it even better than an AD carry getting filled top and trying to play Darius or something along those lines. But if you're not in that situation, let's say you're a support main getting filled jungle, there's probably no champs you could play, I hope you're not jungling Pyke or something, then you can pick a champion that we're going to be recommending in these guides. So every role is going to recommend some champions that are really good to play as an autofill player and a general guideline on how to play them. Now, if that champion you've selected and you've put that time and effort into, gets banned or taken away, you can use your dodge, especially if you don't get filled that often. But if your champion gets banned or picked very, very often, then maybe you can look to cycle it out, get a new one, and put a bit of time, a bit of preparation to learn it. Because in the long run, if you're playing, let's say, 1,000 games of your main role, and you get filled, 30, 40 for each other role, you're going to be building champ mastery regardless on the champion you pick. So I strongly recommend picking one, but if it is a champion that's always banned or taken, that can be harmful. So most of the champs recommended in this guide are not going to be in that case probably ever. The champions are too popular to be in a situation where they're going to be permabanned, or their kits are too simple. They generally don't like when simple kitted champs are OP. So that's going to be a good guideline for you to follow. I also advise trying to use your ban in a way that makes you the most comfortable. So don't just ban what you normally do every game when you get your main role, don't just ban the strongest meta pick, anything like that. Ban the champion you hate playing against the most in that position. So for example, when I play bot lane, I like to ban Draven. Even if I'm ADC or support, it doesn't really matter, because I feel like when I'm playing support and my ADC picks something passive, like a Zeri or a Xayah, I feel like my options in that game are very limited, so it doesn't matter how strong Draven is at the time. I just hate playing against it. I feel like compared to every other champion, the kill threat is so high, in my experience playing against it, and if your ADC or support picks something passive, when you pick something aggressive, I feel like you have no agency, so I ban it purely for that reason, because I don't like to play against it, where of course if I'm playing any other role, I don't care at all. I'm not going to ban it 0% chance, or if I go mid, I'll ban a champion like Hui at the moment, just because he's relatively new, and I haven't memorized the trading patterns, dodging the skill shots, the cooldowns of it, so I'm just a little bit uncomfortable playing against it, so I just ban it to make myself more comfortable. So definitely look to ban the champion that you hate playing against the most. Doesn't matter how OP it is. If you get filled top and hate playing against Alawi, just ban it. Especially if that champion is good into your one champion of choice. So if your top lane champion is Garen, maybe you ban Darius every time. If you don't like that matchup, just pick a ban of that champion that you hate playing against the most to give yourself the most comfort in that game. Now, as for dodging, the only two scenarios I'd want you to dodge is if your champion is taken or picked away and you've only got the one, or if their team comp, your team comp is so terrible and you're in a bad matchup. So if you're autofilled, let's say you're a jungle main, you get put top, and you're Garen versus like a Darius, and then you have Musty, Irelia mid jungle. Probably your team comp is so bad and you're in a tricky matchup, the chance that you can explode the game and be the difference maker to the point where your comp doesn't matter is pretty low. So I'd say dodge if you're in a bad matchup and your comp is terrible, but if only one of those conditions are met, then it should be fine to play. And the final piece of advice, and probably the most important, a lot of people have the get carried mentality when they get autofilled. They just sort of chill, sit back, try to get CS, and just try to play team fights out. But I do want you to shed that. I want you to put a bit of time and effort into a champion, learn how they function in the game, and how to be impactful on that champion so you can actually be the difference maker. Let's say the game is 50-50 in terms of skill gap. I know that feels like it never happens, but if you're just kind of get carried and do nothing, you're going to be the reason your team loses. But if you're trying to be impactful and have agency, sure, at first you might have a couple games where you die more than you normally would. But in the long run of being autofilled, and it shouldn't take too long, especially the recommended champs have relatively high ease of execution, you're going to start to be impactful, even if it's something as simple as creating pressure looking for a play instead of just ARAMing with your team. That small difference can be the difference maker. The small difference in your play can change the outcome, so it's definitely worth it in the long run to have a good baseline, a good idea on how to play your champion, and try to be impactful instead of just, oh, just chill in my lane, I don't really know the matchup, I'll just get CS and then group up. Try to do better, try to learn how to be impactful on that champion and their role. Another common mistake I see when I play against autofill players is the use of TP. And any top lane main knows if you TP away, most of the time there is going to be a tax. You're going to lose 2 of 3 plates and 2 of 3 waves. So that means your TP has to be a guaranteed good play. And for an autofill player, that can be really hard to see, so it has to be very clear to you, like a TP flank behind them when you've got Malphite ulti, something like that. A very clear 100% play, it has to be good, because the payoff is not worth it. Now, if you are versus some tank champions, like an Ornn or something like that, it's not as dangerous, but if you TP away and give a Gwen, a Jax, Fiora 3 plates for 3 waves, you're going to be on the back foot. Your team is going to struggle as well to deal with that Fed Bruiser, so your TP play before 14 minutes has to be a 100% guaranteed play, or your opponent needs to be dead, not in lane, anything like that, or the payoff is way too big. So be very careful with your TP before 14 minutes, especially against a strong Bruiser champion that is going to snowball really hard. And the final rule for getting filled into top lane, this applies to top lane mains as well, but tier 1s are expendable, tier 2s are not. So what I mean by that, the mid game can be quite confusing. You want to be a dragon as much as you can, all these mid lane fights, everything like that, but you don't really want to be giving towers to these strong side laning champs. So you can give a tier 1 for a big dragon fight if you feel like it's going to happen, because even if it doesn't work out, the fight's lost or the fight doesn't happen, it's a tier 1, it doesn't matter that much, but tier 2s are not. If you give a tier 2, it has to be for a really big objective, so like a Baron, a Dragon Soul, something along those lines. You can't just give a tier 2 for a dragon, so you either have to hold your opponent and let your team 4v4, or you need to push out the wave really deep before you move to that objective. So be willing to give tier 1s, but not tier 2s, as the gold that they're going to gain from tier 2 is way too high. Now I'm going to be going through what to do when you are autofilled into top lane, and I know the majority of my viewers are top lane mains, so feel free to skip to the other roles if this doesn't apply to you, but some general rules and guidelines I want to give before we move on to the champions to play. The first rule I want you to follow is water level 1 every game. If you can get push, or if you're unsure if you can get push especially, you need to be level 1 warding. So in top lane, a 3-wave crash is a very consistent way to play, but the enemy jungler can kill 3 camps and gank you before you get to that point, and there's a lot of creative jungle paths, like Raptors, Red Golems, where they can gank you if you're trying to play aggressive. And it's just too much for an autofill player to try to track. Like, oh, Kane can't come at this timer, he can't come till 320, Lilia comes at this time, Lee Sin comes at this time. Don't worry about it, just ward level 1 every game, because even if you're getting push, and your ward expires, by the time it expires, as long as you're crashing wave 3 or maybe even wave 2, the wave will come back towards you, so you're going to have that security. So especially if you're playing aggressive and trying to get push, ward level 1, and I'll put the locations up on the screen as images. So another rule to follow that I see a lot of autofill players or below platinum students as well do is don't move to a weird skirmish on the map so your jungler doing something crazy unless it's good for you. So there are always going to be exceptions to every rule in League. If you give a wave to move to a skirmish and you get a triple, of course, right, I'm not going to complain. But in general, more often than not, over 90% of the time, if you just move to a skirmish and react straight away when your wave or your lane's at a bad spot, you're going to lose so much that it's not going to be worth it. So definitely look to move at a time when it's convenient for you. So if you just crash a wave or you've got a nice freeze, your opponent's not in lane, anything like that, sure, you can move, you can get involved, especially if the skirmish looks good, but don't just react to what's happening on the map. You got to prioritize yourself, making yourself strong and consistent instead of just, oh, I'm autofill, I'll just move and try to help my team and hope they carry me. How often is that going to work? Probably not very often. Now, the main rule for top lane, I'll say this is the most important, your back timer is your top priority over everything. So greeting for plates, greeting for your item, trying to help your jungler out again, your back timer needs to trump every single thing. Because if you crash a wave after your opponent bases and you miss your back timer, or if you have a freeze and you miss your back timer and they come back with the item HP advantage, most of the time, unless you're playing some crazy champion like Rumble who's just too strong, but an autofill player probably not playing Rumble, you're going to get completely destroyed because they can keep you pinned under tower suffering for a really long time. And again, exceptions. If you have TP, maybe you can greed for your item, base TP back. But in general, especially early game, prioritize your base timer over everything. Now, as for the 3 champions I recommend for anyone getting filled into top lane, I've selected Garen, Malphite, and Nasus. Now, the reason I've chosen these champions is because their ease of execution is extremely high, they're relatively easy to play, and they are always going to be useful. You can always provide value on these champions, and they're not reliant on doing well in snowballing in the early game, where if you compare it to a champion like Tom, where, yeah, your matchups are very easy, your champion's quite strong early, it's hard to lose lane, your champion is useless if you don't snowball. You don't really have any agency, you don't really do much, so even though you could play him and do fine, you're not going to be very impactful in the game unless you have really high mastery on him, where a champion like Malphite, for example, even if you're down 20, 30 CS, even if you're down 100 CS, you're always going to be useful, and champions like Garen or Nasus is very easy to stabilize your lane and be useful in the game, and I'm going to be going through exactly how for each champion. So starting with Garen, and I have made a full guide on the champion and also Malphite, so feel free to use those if you want to learn a little bit more, but a general guideline to play him. For runes, you're going to be taking Phase Rush into ranged champions and Conqueror into melee champs. Now, Conqueror does give you more carry potential most of the time, and especially if you're playing in Platinum and below, I recommend defaulting to Conqueror most of the time, but that is an easy way to follow. Melees take Conq, range versus Phase, and that is going to be fine most of the time. Now, in the early game, if you have Conqueror, you can play quite aggressive for big trades, but no matter what happens on this champion, if you can get to 1100 gold unscathed and get your Berserker Greaves on your first recall, you're going to be in a pretty good spot. So take TP, take Ignite and Flash, don't take TP, and then look to play for all-ins at level 6 with your Berserker Greaves. If it looks good, depends on the matchup of course, but generally you're going to have your first spike at Berserks, so if you can get on your first recall, you're in a really good position. Now, your second item spike and your key build is going to be Stridebreaker. Now, once you have this is when you really need to start upping your pace of the game, pushing in waves, moving, looking for aggressive plays on side, around mid, because you spike extremely hard on this item. That's when you have the most agency in the game. So definitely it should be a switch in your mind. All right, I have Stridebreaker now. Time to stop sitting under my tower and abusing Garen passive. Time to abuse Stridebreaker. Level 11 with Stridebreaker, massive spike. You want to be getting as much work done as you can. Now, if you're feeling like you're struggling a little bit to get to Berserker Greaves or Stridebreaker without getting behind, a good general rule you can follow in your lane is it is okay to give up some minions as long as you're not giving up XP. As long as you're maintaining relatively good XP, you should be okay. Because Garen, you can sit back and regen with your passive, but if you get poked, of course, it's going to drop. So don't be afraid to give up some minions in some hard matchups when you're low, just to soak the XP and abuse your passive and then come back in later on for that farm. Because even if you finish your matchup down 20, 25 CS, but you get your Stridebreaker and you're at the same level, both level 11, you're still going to be very useful. It's when you walk up and get chunked and die, or chunked and have to base and lose a bunch of XP, that's when your champion feels quite useless. So definitely prioritize XP over perfect CS in these tricky matchups. Now, once you enter the mid game, so let's imagine to an easy way for you to enter the mid game, you're going to have your first item. So Stride Break and Berserks, or when one of the towers are dead, or when it's 14 minutes, you're in the mid game. Now it's time to implement a little bit of mid game macro. So the easiest formula for you to follow on Garen in the mid game is you want to be going to the side lane on the opposite side of the next objective that you want to play for. So if you feel like your team wants to play for Dragon, you can go top. If they want to play for Herald, you can go bottom. But your goal is to create pressure. So you're not going bottom to kill someone or break tower. That's going to be great if you can do that. That's going to be a mistake punish. But you're going to that side, let's just imagine it's top for this example, to create pressure. You're pushing in the wave and pulling somebody away so they can't group up as 5 people. Because if you didn't use side lane, you might as well play Malphite every game, and we'll go through him next. But if you push inside, make somebody react, and if they don't respond, break the tower. If they do respond, look for a play around mid or around the objective that you're playing away from. Try to create a numbers advantage fight. So either a 5v4 or someone ganking you 4v3. The easiest formula to follow. Push your wave under tower. If they're not there, break it. If they are there, then move to a play 5v4. If there's nothing to do when you push them in, just eat camps and be very greedy and scale up. So the rest of your build, I'll put it all on the screen, but you're going to be mainly building crit items, so PD, IE, PD, Mortal Reminder, or Fandom, and 2 tanks. So a couple build options you have there, but if you're ever unsure what to build, just go Stride, PD, Mortal, and IE. Just go the full damage Garen build and play very greedy. That's going to be the more consistent way to play. Also, once you enter the mid game, it's really important to pick up a sweeper and a pink. So once your lane is done, once you got your stride, swap out that yellow trinket, sweeper, pink ward, because as you're pushing and somebody and moving, it's better if they can't see you. So you don't need to know the perfect spot to put a pink. I'll put a couple on the screen, but generally you're just pushing in your wave, your fog of warring down, so running down with sweeper, and creating a 5v4 team fight for your team. So if you can do that, your chance of winning that team fight is going to be a lot higher, of course. Now, the way you want to be team fighting on this champion is going to be looking to attack from either the side or the flank position, especially if you're doing a high damage build. You don't really want to be running straight at them or having people dive onto your team and trying to peel on Garen. There are scenarios where you can do that, but if you're ever unsure what to do, then flank from side or back. And you don't always have to commit just because you're there. You can stare at them and be a bit creative, try to get into a hidden bush. Garen, one of the best champs at cheesing in bush, especially with the crit build. So if you can push in somebody, move, and they can't see you on your sweeper, hide on the bush around Dragon, that's going to be a great way for you to play. So don't just default group up as 5, try to look for team fights because you're auto-filled, push in a wave, make somebody answer, and then create that 5v4 fight for your team. So the main win condition on this champion, so generally that mid-game macro is going to be a pretty good indicator of how to win the game, but the main win condition is going to come, I'd say, around Baron. If you're winning pre-20, you're a bit of a machine, but around Baron, you're going to be pushing in bottom, making that numbers advantage fight, and that will lead to Baron, right? So pretty straightforward, same thing to do with Dragon. Push in bot, make them respond, and then look for a numbers advantage team fight around mid, around Baron. Sometimes you can run straight to Baron with your sweeper and get control of it for your team, but generally in the mid game, you're trying to create as much pressure as possible in bot lane, the mid to late game, sorry, when Baron's up, you're trying to create as much pressure as possible during that period bottom, so that your team can either get a favorable fight that leads to Baron, or maybe you get ganked and your team gets Baron from that anyway. Moving on to Malphite, and straight away before I touch on anything, the golden rule before you pick this champion is you need to ban Sylas. You don't want to be the guy that picks Malphite and gives the enemy top or mid Sylas with Malphite ulti. It's too hard for your team to play. Now, Malphite's one of the most useful champions in the entire game without resources, so it doesn't actually matter how well you do in your lane most of the time, but that doesn't mean you can just run it down, of course, and be useful, because that means the enemy top is also going to be useful if you give them resources. So it just means you don't need to get all your CS or anything like that, high CS. You're still going to be useful. So if you're in a hard matchup especially, be willing to give XP. And give CS, sorry, as long as you can get XP, you're always going to have value. Now, on Malphite, your passive is kind of your sustain in lane in a way, so play around that. Keep good track on the cooldown, and when you walk up to farm, they're going to hit you, you're going to lose your passive, and you sit back, you might need to give a minion, wait for it to come back up before you walk up again. It sounds simple, but a lot of Malphites falter at this point. And on Malphite, you're going to be taking Comet into ranged champions and Grasp into melees. That's a good general rule to follow. But I would actually say on this champion, I would recommend opening up the Malphite guide. I actually made a section in the runes. I'll put a screenshot of it where I showcase which rune you can take for each champion as my recommendation. Avoid all the mumbo jumbo like Airy and First Strike. Just take Comet and Grasp. If you're autofilled on this champion, it's going to make your journey a lot easier. Now on Malphite, it's relatively straightforward. You want to be taking 100 to 0 trades. So with Comet, you're just going to be queuing them. You'll do 2 points in Q, or 3 points in Q on that as well. 2 points Q at level 3 and 3 points at level 5. And then on Grasp, you want to be walking up and giving them a little bash with your W, with your passives up, right? So 100-0 trades, try to stay high HP, chip them lower and lower. And this champion's biggest spike by far, you can guess it, probably at level 6, right? This is when you're the most useful. Any jungle gank that comes top is probably going to be a kill if you're not behind at this point. If you're level 6, but the enemy Renekton's level 7 with a kill, your jungler's probably not going to kill him. So it's really important that you stabilize and try to be same XP, relatively even, until you get to that point, and then you can look to play a bit more aggressive. So poke your level 1 Q doesn't do that much damage, but once you get level 3, level 5, you can poke them down, and then look for all-ins with your ulti, or look for set up for your jungle to get a free kill for him. Now, other than the level 6 spike, your next spikes are mainly going to be based around your first item, but you can't really compare it. It doesn't matter as much as like a Garen Stridebreaker or Camille Triforce, anything like that. So don't give up a fight and be like, oh, I need to farm 200 for Sunfire, anything like that. It doesn't really matter as much as it does on other champions. So your first item, normally going to be Sunfire, or if you're just an AP champion, an easy AP champ, go the AP Sunfire, or a hard AP champ, you can go Kanik Rukun, but generally you're just going to be building whatever tank items you want in the game. The build doesn't matter too much, I would say. I do recommend a Sunfire as it's easier to use, gives you wave clear. Now, the most important part of this champion is how you play the mid game. And it probably sounds relatively straightforward. I'd say it is easier than most, but a good thing to note about this champion is if side lane didn't exist, if the enemy top never goes side, you are pretty happy. You don't want to be farming too much. You don't want to be pushing it all the way to tower or anything like that, because you want to be looking for proactive plays with your ulti as much as you can. So if the enemy top doesn't go side, that is a win for you. The only times I want you to go side is when you have to answer the enemy top, or he's going to get the tier 2, remembering our golden rule, or if your ulti is on cooldown. When your ulti is down, you can look to go backside, get some farm, push it out, but generally if you've got ulti up and your enemy top is not pinning you under a tower, you want to be grouped up around mid and try to bring a sweeper as well. You know, you're going to see a trend. Pick up your sweeper in the mid game, especially when your one of your towers are down, and just look to hide away, look to attack them every mid wave, look to attack them every objective with your ulti and get the fight started. Now, as for team fighting on this champion, I'd say the golden rule is holding your ulti. Don't feel pressure just because you see an opportunity to ult someone to take it. You want to be holding onto it for the most impactful time. So if you can see a 3 or a 4 man, you know, take it, I'm not going to complain, but don't feel like, oh, I see someone instantly ulti and then, my team's kind of far away, they can't follow me up. Or, oh, they just flashed it, now I'm useless. Hold on to it, let the fight play out a little bit, and then commit your ulti. Now, if you go from Fog of War, and you're going to hit, of course, one of those 2 or 3 man ultis, or even on their prior AD carry with somebody following up, of course, go for it, but I just don't want you to be in that situation where both teams are grouped up, ready to fight, and you just send your ulti straight away, and someone flashes it, or you just hit 1 or 2 people that aren't very impactful, like a Nautilus or something. Hold your ulti, because if you hold your ulti and you're just standing there, bashing down the front line, the AD carry in mid feel very pressured, they can't walk up, but once you've used your ulti, even if you do kill somebody, now your champ's value is very, very low. So the threat of holding your ulti can sometimes outweigh the impact of the ulti itself, so definitely want to hold on to it. Be patient with it and wait for that golden opportunity to arise. And as for the win condition on this champion, you want to be at team fights first and looking for engages with your ulti. So a good rule to follow, neutralize side, look for a proactive play. If side wave is already neutraled, and what I mean by that is it's not coming towards you, pressuring you, making you respond. If it's in a position where you don't have to answer it, you're looking for a proactive play. You're looking to blow up their mobile carries, so it can be really important to keep track of flashes as well on this champion. But generally, you just want to be grouped up, looking for proactive plays from Fog of War where they can't see you, and looking to get fights started, carry team fights for your team, especially around neutral objectives. And for our final champion, we have Nasus. Now, some of you may be surprised to see him on the list, when traditionally only one tricks play this champ, but right now the tech you can take on him makes him a really good autofill champion. If you can get to your spikes unscathed, you can get to Triforce level 11 and you're not too far behind, you're always going to be extremely useful in the game, and getting to that point has never been easier. So I touched on it in the recent Nasus video, but you want to be taking Phase Rush with this page with double Adaptive Force. That point is really important, and you want to be taking 3 points in E. Now, of course, if you're a Nasus main, you can mess around a little bit with the build and the skill points, but if you're being auto-filled 3 points in E, what that allows you to do, if you start Doran's Ring with double Adaptive Force, is at level 5, your E will kill every single caster minion from full HP, which makes your lane very easy. If you get to level 5, even just level 5, and you're not behind, you can just dump an E on the wave, all the casters are dead, walk back up, dump your second E on the melees, you might miss one from your minions, but it makes lane very easy, and if you poke your opponent, and hit the wave at the same time, that's going to be very ideal for you. So the spikes on this champion, level 6 and Triforce. At level 6, if you're not behind, your champion becomes strong. It's very hard to all in him once he's 6. Of course, if their champion is way stronger, like a Darius or something, be very careful. But because you have Wither, Phase Rush, and your E, and even Ghost, it's going to be very easy for you to get to that point unscathed unless your opponent is exceptionally good at laning. So you want to be poking your opponent with E as much as you can and collecting last hits at the same time. Just make sure your E is a big AoE spell. Don't break the wave. You want the wave to be coming back to you as much as you can, especially in the early game. So try not to hit as much of the wave as you can. Try to aim your E in a way, and you could even normal cast this ability. Try to aim your E so it only hits a couple minions, especially if you're last hitting them, and the enemy champion, because they're going to be walking towards you, they're going to be trying to staunch, so dump your E onto them. Go 2 points in E level 3, so EQE, get your last hits with Q, and then at 3 points in E you start to max your Q, and you just want to be letting the wave come in, lifesteal and farm your Q with stacks, and it's going to be very straightforward. If you get to Triforce and you've barely even hit your opponent except for with your E, you're going to be fine most of the time. Now, if you can get to that point and you can start to push yourself a bit more, if you build that champ mastery, because at level 6 with Ghost, you can run down a lot of champs, especially easy matchups. And if you take approach velocity into range matchups, your Wither becomes even more OP. But definitely, if you can get to that point unscathed, you're going to have a lot of value in the game. So that should be your default. Don't try to win lane. Don't try to kill your opponent. Your default should be just to poke them down, get as much farm as you can, and get to level 6 and to Triforce eventually with high stacks and without being behind in XP at all. And as for the mid game on this champion, you can probably guess you are going to be split pushing. So I always recommend split push on the opposite side of the next objective that everyone's going to be playing for. So if it's Dragon, go top, if it's Baron, go bottom. And your goal is to create as much pressure as possible. Now, on a champion like Garen, generally you want to be pushing them under tower and moving, trying to create that 5v4 fight. And don't get me wrong, you can do that on Nasus, but if I were to put it on kind of a scale, Nasus would lean a lot more towards the side of pushing your wave and be greedy. Eat some camps, poke your opponent under tower with E maybe, or Q the tower in front of them. You want to be pressuring side and drawing people to you a lot more than you want to be pressuring side and bringing your character to the enemy team. So there are always going to be exceptions to that rule, but if you're ever unsure, which in a real game that can be very tricky to see, just create pressure. Just push inside, make it so your opponent never leaves. If he does, you're going to obliterate his tower completely. Try to get as many stacks as you can. Try to get as fed as you can, as much gold, stacks, whatever. Just get really strong, make them respond, and then if you see a team fight that you can join, sure. Or if you see an opportunity to bash tower in front of your opponent, which is even more tempting, go for it. Because there are going to be scenarios where you can wither your opponent, walk up, break the tower a little bit, get a couple Q hits onto it, click back, especially if they're not playing a strong Conqueror Bruiser like an Olaf or a Darius. It's going to be pretty impossible against them. But if you verse any kind of weak champion, maybe a Fleet or a Grasp, another tank, there's going to be a lot of agency for you to break the tower in front of them. So that's the most pressuring thing you can do. So your default, opposite side next objective, create pressure, bring people to you, get some vision in the jungle if you can. And once you're in that nice position, the enemy top laner can't play, then you're just punishing mistakes. So you're kind of keeping it a little bit chill. You're warding up a jungle, and you're just farming your Q. If your opponent leaves or you can hit tower, sweet. If your opponent doesn't, but there looks like a good fight you can move to, sweet. But default to being that greedy silent threat, that constant pressure, and try to pull the enemy team to answer you in the mid game. Now, as for team fighting on the champion, generally you do just want to play more of a front to back, as your champ's not very mobile. Of course, if you can flank unseen, it's going to be fine. But generally, if you play front to back and just bash down whoever goes onto you or onto your team with your Q, you're going to have a lot of value. Nasus can chew through tanks pretty well with E and Q. As long as you E before your Q as well, that's going to be very vital for you. But an important rule to follow is you don't want to be using your Wither on a non-important target. So if the Lee Sin flies into insect your teammate, don't Wither him. It's not going to slow down his ward jump or his flash. Or if Nautilus or Alistair goes in, especially supports, do not use your Wither on these champions. You want to be holding it, and kind of similar to the Malphite rule, make it so their backline is scared to walk up. Make it so their ADC does not want to walk up and auto-take your team or you, or you're just going to Wither him and he can't play, which is a big reason I have him on the list. No matter how far behind you are, if you don't do well in your lane, you have one of the most useful abilities in the entire game. Wither is so strong, so hard to play against, lasts for a really long time, but just make sure you use it in a good time. If Xin Zhao, Lee Sin, all these beefy Bruiser jungle, Renekton goes in, don't Wither them. Now, the exception to that are hard carry dive champs. So maybe champs like Gwen go in. You can wither her, or maybe from jungle, it'll be a champion like Kindred. I guess that's a bad example. He's not going to go in. But generally, you just want to be withering. The only carries you wither are the full damage, like a Fiora or a Gwen that go in. But generally, you're holding your wither and making it really difficult for the backline to approach. Because if you dump your wither on the Lee Sin, the Jarvan, whoever goes in, then the AD carry mid are like, sweet, we can play the game now and just do free damage because all of your threat on them is gone because you're still a pretty immobile champion. But there's going to be room for you to pop phase rush and run them down, but generally bash the front line down, hold W for a priority target that wants to be utilizing movement speed and auto attacks, the most on their team. And then when you get that opportunity to run through their front line, maybe they did, then you can dive onto the back line after. So more of a front to back style with holding your W for the back line. Now, as for the win condition on this champion, it is going to be that constant threat inside. You always want to be pressuring, and normally that's going to be around a vital objective that changes to the game. So a Baron or a Dragon Soul, something along those lines. So let's imagine Baron. You want to be pressuring bottom. Hopefully you can get the tier 2 down. You just want to keep stacking, farming, growing bigger and stronger. And then it will depend on the game sometimes, making people answer you, or somebody answers and you either break structure in front of them to pull more people to you, or you move to the enemy. But generally just maintaining that pressure is going to make the opponent crack and make mistakes. They might TP away. They might try to roam for a play, because no one locks in a game of solo queue and tries to sit under tower for 20 minutes against Nasus. They're going to try to do something, they're going to leave, or they're going to cry for their team, they're going to gank you, that's going to explode the game. So that's going to be your main win condition on this champion, creating as much pressure inside as possible, and absorbing that pressure, or bringing your pressure around the map, but mainly defaulting to absorbing pressure and trying to bring as many people as you can to side. Now that's it for the recommended champions, but for my final point I want to go over, if you are somebody that doesn't want to play one of these champs, if you already have a champ in mind, maybe you're a Cassio mid player, so you play at top, something along those lines, it's really important for you to figure out whatever champion you're playing, the general way you want to be playing, and the early and especially the mid game. So early mid game team fighting would be the big three, where you want to be learning the general rules, watch a guide on it, learn some content, watch some VODs of it, and really start to understand. So for Garen, for example, get to stride break without being behind, push the opposite side, and move to a play, right? Relatively simple, but that's got to be your default, where I see even people that main Garen fail to do that, where they float around. So if you can do that, you're going to have an advantage over the majority of players, I would say. So it doesn't matter what your champion is, you need to be learning the general way that these champions are played, and there's so much educational content out there for other roles as well, and a lot of links will be in the description from the other 4 coaches. You can check their stuff out, but you need to be figuring out the champion from each role that you pick, the clear way you want to be playing them, and have that as your default that you can always fall back on no matter how chaotic the game is.
What's up guys, in this segment we're going to be going over a quick jungle guide for specifically people who are auto-filled or looking to get in the jungle role. We're going to be covering when to farm, when to gank, and how to carry on the jungle role. Alright guys, so now we're going to be talking about the fundamental of jungling, which is jungle clearing. Clearing camps is very essential to getting tempo or getting turns that you otherwise wouldn't have. I see all too often people neglect this. So the first thing we're going to be discussing is kiting camps. Now, what you need to do for kiting camps is you need to be able to hit the buff, and then when it hits you back, you need to know when to walk backwards. So the clear sign you need to walk backwards is after the auto attack animation's already locked in. So when I see the red buffs locked in the auto attack animation, after he's already hit me, I can start walking back. And as simple as that, you can practice that. Sometimes you can get 2 hits, walk backwards. Depending on your attack speed, sometimes you can get 1 hit. So it all depends, but something that will really help you save health and increase your clear speed a lot. So the next tip for jungle clearing is going to be pulling the camp out of patience range and killing it. Now this is super effective, just like the previous concept we talked over kiting camps. You're not only going to kite your camp, save your health, but you're going to pull camps and be able to kite it way past the point of where it should be going, hence the outside of patience range. So some guidelines to go over to help you get better at this, because if you do de-leash the camp, it is really bad for your clear speed. But if you get really good at this, it's super rewarding, and usually you're going to clear much faster than your counterparts. So the main thing you're going to want to understand is, in general, doesn't matter what champ you're playing, around 350 to 400 health, usually you're going to kill any camp when you pull it outside the patience range. Once you get really good at your champion and you can understand the limits better, then you can go further, or you get better at this skill. The second thing that helped me a lot when I was learning to pull camps out of patience range is going to be the 3.5 to 4 second rule. So basically camps lose patience around 4 seconds. So if you know how much damage you do, you can pretty much calculate whether you can do it or not based on how much time you have, right? The 4 second rule. So that is really important for being able to clear even faster than you're already clearing. Alright guys, now let's talk about the 3 junglers I recommend for autofill or newer players. And my number 1 seed is going to be none other than Amumu. It's one of my favorite champs right now because it's super underrated and people feel pretty stupid for losing to this champ, which is probably one of the biggest reasons I like playing it. So the big thing on Amumu is, yes, you mainly want to full clear, but the problem with Amumu can be level 1. So holding your ability start's really important in case you get invaded. And the thing about Amumu that people don't know is that if you start Q, you actually win a lot 1v1. Or you can stop a lot of invades because you just have 2 CCs. So yeah. Another thing about Amumu, which won't happen in this clip, but just to keep in mind, is your level 3 is not that bad. You don't need to full clear, but you generally just want to full clear to get the 6. Now, as you can see here, if you do red star, guys, you have to learn to conserve your mana. It's really important. And you can see here, I started E and I went E second, sorry, rather. I started W on the camps and then I went E second if there was no fight. This is going to help clear up your speed a little bit more. As you can see, I'm cutting it outside patience range and I'm able to pull off the full clear. Now, if we keep going, I'm going to be level 4 and in another full clear and a random camp, I will be 6. So that's what I'm going to be looking for. In the meantime, when I hit level 4, I'm pretty strong, so I'm just going to be looking and miss my Q, but I'm able to recognize that's the real one. And the another thing with Amumu, guys, if you fight in the wave or raptor camp, you're going to be able to hit your E multiple times because your E will just get reset off of the auto attacks, right? So really good to fight in the wave or at the raptor camp. As you can see, I'm going to be clearing, recalling now, and I'm just going to be clearing again. And once I get 6, you'll see that I'm going to be playing really aggressive. So top's getting dived, and I'm just going to ignore top because I can't make it. That's fine. This Jarvan's skipping his camps while I'm farming, so it's no deal. I kite the camp, hit the camp, kite the camp. My Grump's spawning a little bit later. It's up now, so now I'm going to hit 6. And the special thing about Amumu is that Grubs is up now. So not only am I 6, the Grubs is really effective to take because of how Amumu's passive works. I'm going to tap 1 camp each for my Amumu passive for the true damage. And then I'm just going to not try to kill one. I want to keep all of them alive as long as possible so I can keep my E reset going. And now I'm just going to sweep top and potentially look top. Because I have ulti and I kind of just want to use my ult. So I'm looking for the opportunity just to use my ult so I can put it on cooldown and then kill someone else again. And as you can see, we're able to trade 1-for-1. Not well executed whatsoever, but he loses the wave. So that's going to be your general plan for Amumu. And once you hit Leandri's, that's going to be your next spike, which I'm going to go over to. So la-di-da-di-da, I'm going to be farming because I don't have ult, don't really want to fight. And once I have my ult, then I can fight, right? As you can see, I pretty much just farmed, waiting for my ult. I got a free double kill, and now I'm going to wait for my ult again, but I have Leandri's this time, so that's the key here. I'm going to fight, I'm going to make Jarvan flash. But the key here is knowing that I have Leandris. It's really important you guys understand that when you have your item spike on whatever champion you play, you need to be playing as aggressive as you can. In this case, I couldn't do anything dumb because they just left. I got 2 grubs and I'm just farming a jungle because my mid laner died. But eventually, you're going to want to do something aggressive. So on this timer, I'm looking for something aggressive and I'm able to... Do I even outplay this? No, I don't. Well, I get 1v2'd, but you understand the point. I'm looking for something because I want to keep cycling my ult cooldown. And I'm really strong because I have my first item spec. Alright guys, for seed number 2, we have Shyvana. The reason why I picked Shyvana is sort of the similar lines of why I picked Amumu in the first place. I think you have a lot of agency. You can do things a lot on your own. I think in solo queue it's really important to feel like you have power over the game. So I really think that these 2 champions, if you get ahead, you can really put the game in your hands. Whereas other champions, you might feel like the team's dog, like Sejuani or something, or Maokai. So here, I'm just full clearing. That's going to be the main goal. And in these scenarios, depending on what your opponent's reaction is, you're going to decide what to do. In this case, a lot of the time, when you're playing Shyvana, the jungle is either going to gank or they're going to invade. And when they gank, they're going to be down a camp, right? Naturally, because, you know, they ganked and I full cleared. So in this scenario, I'm able to steal the camp. I'm 4-3. I'm abusing the fact that he ganked, so he's down a level. And I'm able to literally take all his camps and recall. And it's no different in the same scenario where you just want to hit level 6. I'm not really interested in the Scuttle Crab because he's already going to get it. So my goal is just to hit 6, and him messing around here does not matter. I can see you dive top, but we're going to completely ignore that because there is no need to waste time when I'm just doing my own thing. I just need to hit 6. And so you're going to see me keep clearing. I got my Jack of all trades, which is super good on my first buy. And this Katarina, I got caught a roaming. Now I caught these guys in the river. And this game is going to shambles for them. But the main thing is, even if they didn't troll, I'm going to wait for my opportunity once I hit 6 to do something anyway. So it's all good. Now I'm 6. Now I'm going to be looking for the camp respawn. Because remember guys, last time I took his Gromp. So I know his Gromp timer. I just puffed down naturally. He's trading. So I'm about to hit 6. So I'm probably going to dive bot here. If I have the chance. No, I'm not. Basically, I'm probably going to wait for the next cannon wave. So maybe I won't dive bot. Maybe I'll dive bot next wave. And I'll do the Scuttle Crab. And now I can dive bot. I can probably channel my ult and just poke them if I really want. Which I do. And now they're stuck between me and a hard place. So here, they're stuck on the tower. We double kill them. And essentially, we probably get 2 plates and they lose 2 or 3 waves. So at this point, the game's completely snowballed. I'll probably just show you guys the most important timer that I've talked about in the previous video of me with Amumu, which is going to be my first item spike. Something I really want to emphasize with you guys is your first item spike. Okay, now I have my Shojin, so the main thing is I don't have ult here, but I still want to play as aggressively as possible, guys. I can't emphasize this enough. When you are ahead and you have your first item spike, that's the peak of jungle most of the time, unless you're playing a Karthus where when you get Rabadons, it's your peak. But usually for most junglers, Leandris spike, Shojin, whatever it's going to be, Sundered Sky, that is going to be the strongest you're ever going to be as a jungler before you get basically outscaled in terms of damage. Then your role changes. But when you hit the first item spike, that's when you're a true carry. You're probably the strongest role in the game / champion. So really important to play as aggressively as possible. As you can see, I'm just ulting on the tower, looking for any sort of fight because yeah, these guys have components and I have full items. I should not need to respect them basically, unless... Okay, every clip I've died so far, but you guys get the point. Alright guys, my number 3 pick is going to be Viego. The reason why we pick Viego here is because this champion is a lot of fun, and I guess you just get to play a lot of different champions when you get resets. So combine that with the fact that this champion is actually very good right now in the meta. With AE junglers coming back, it means Viego is coming back, because Viego is just traditionally good into committal CC champions. So here you're going to see me clearing. Not the fastest clear, but decent. Still need to work on that. The main thing that I want you guys to understand is, yes, I could 3 camp, but your default, guys, should be full clearing. Unless you see a clear opportunity where it's worth skipping your camps, most of the time, guys, you should essentially just be full clearing. The mentality when people play Autofill is to get carried, but I want you guys, if you want to have influence over the game, to think the opposite. Think you're the carry. So getting yourself ahead is much more important than just letting your team basically carry you, which will not really happen in solo queue, right? It's pretty rare. So you can see I just troll there. I try to dive. I misplay the dive, but my camp respawns are up. So big thing to note here is camp respawns around 420. Yes, literally 420. So something to think about. Basically, you probably want to be recalling around 355-ish. So that's a really important tip if you want to know how much time you can muck around before you need a recall for your camp respawn. Very important to cycle camps. In this case, Ivan stayed bot side, so I took his grump, and I'm looking to do my camp respawns on my side now and just hit level 6, because usually between this phase and level 6, there's not much going on. But in this scenario, top's fighting a lot, so I'm able to get the freebie here. And probably do grubs and then recall for 6. So we're going to be trading objectives here. I'm able to secure the top gank. Let me get a real quick rewind on the top gank. Why did this gank work? So Rankton's level 6. He has Ignite. Aatrox is level 6 too. Oh, sorry, level 5. Rankton level 6 Aatrox. But the problem is this Aatrox really wants to crash the wave. So if we drew a line, right, he's past the line, or he's in the same line as me. If we drew a line down the middle. So basically, he doesn't have boots, I don't have boots, so we're going to run in the same line, and Rankton has stun. So that's going to give you a good indicator, depending on the line in which you are relative to your opponent. You should know how much time you have to close the gap, and then if you can close the gap, you usually should be able to kill them, as long as you just have the damage. So I'm going to do the grubs. And the big thing about Viego is, yes, level 6, you always want level 6 on any champion. When you're level 6 to 5, it's just very strong skirmishing advantage. But on Viego, it's not really that strong to be level 6 compared to a Amumu or Shyvana, like the previous champs we talked about. So on Viego, it's more important to be able to hit your item spikes. That's going to be more important than EXP relativity. So here I'm going to be 6 to 5, so obviously I'm going to abuse that, but the main point I'm trying to basically achieve is going to be the first item spike, which is going to come pretty soon, but it's going to require me to actually make a lot of good plays and good decisions, and in that time just be patient. So obviously here we had a lost skirmish, but I'm almost there at my item, but I'm not there yet. So in these scenarios, guys, just be patient, right? I've got like 500 gold for my Blade Rune King, and once I get my Blade Rune, I'm going to be really strong. But right now, I might be up a lot of gold in Ivan, but I'm not actually that strong because I still don't have my item. So you can see I'm not entering river. I'm just focusing on getting my first item. And then once I hit my first item, then I can do something. So you can see there's like a sequence before you get your item spike where you have to play really smart and figure out how to get the gold or the EXP you're looking to achieve so you can fight. So there, I ended up getting a pretty easy full clear into basing with Blade and my magical footwear. So in this scenario, any fight's going to be good for me, so I'm really happy to fight because I got my Blade and I'm pretty much going to run them. So they're diving on a really bad time because this is my strongest point in the game, right? And I'm able to walk them down and basically kill anyone on sight. And yeah, we pretty much snowballed the game from there because they attacked on the wrong turn, which I'm strong and I haven't had components. So really looking to get those item spikes and abuse when you have an item and they do not, or you have a level lead and they do not. Alrighty, let's talk about when to gank. So the reason why I've left this to last is because I don't think it is the most important thing about jungling, although the misconception is you help your team. Jungler's job is just to help his team, but no, junglers can carry, and ganking usually doesn't mean you're carrying, because ganking usually means you're sacrificing farm somewhere. So I just want to preface with that. But when to gank is a broad topic, which is very hard to nail down when specifically to gank because there's so many different scenarios. But the big thing I want you guys to understand is when you're ganking, you're investing in your lanes. So if you believe you can change the state of someone's lane and they can help you back, it's definitely worth ganking. So for example, this is going to be a really clear example where if I help my laner, the laner will help me back in the future. So I rub his back, he rubs my back. In this scenario, it's the Fizz. If I gank this Fizz's lane, who's versing an 80 carry, at level 6, this Fizz should have 1v1 kill pressure, and it should be a free gold or a free kill for me. So in this scenario, I'm investing in his lane because I'm skipping my full clear. That's what I mean by investing. I'm wasting time, my own time, to help another lane so that he can help me in the future generate more gold and EXP. So in this scenario, we gank the Kai'Sa, we're able to push the wave, and I'm able to bail him out of a pretty bad early game by him. So he bases, and then I'm going to base, and now, like I said before, I'm going to wait for him to hit level 6. So I'm going to just farm and wait for that time where he's going to be strong, and the Kai'Sa is going to be really weak because she has no flash, no TP, and my Fizz has a ulti that is pretty much really easy to hit because Kai'Sa has no dash, right? So here I full clear and, well, I get sidelined because in this scenario, guys, of course I want to regank mid for the level 6 timer, but this guy is just a free kill. This guy, think about it like this guy will die faster than my Raptor camp because of how low he is, right? So why not? 1Q, 2Q, 1E, and he's dead. So unfortunately, since I waste my flash and my health to kill this guy, I get the free kill, but I'm not able to gank mid on this timer. So unfortunately, I won't make it when Fizz is 6. Ideally, I would have been here on this timer in the side lane bush where the ward is to kill this guy right now with my Fizz and my Lulu pincering the Kai'Sa. Obviously, things can go wrong where your teammates just mis-execute, but this guy should 100% die in my theoretical world. So, hope you guys learned a lot from this little mini jungle guide series. The biggest thing I want you guys to take from the video is mainly just make sure you're getting yourself ahead. I think it's a big misconception in jungling where you're just the junglers, or you're the team's dog, and you just try to get your lanes ahead. Most of the time, you get yourself ahead and you get your team ahead, that's when you're going to truly be snowballing the game.
There's a few role-specific things for mid that are really important to know and will go a really long way if you just understand some basics. And one of the most important things is just knowing that in general, you want a ward to hug to at all times. The thing with mid lane is that, well, you're very gankable because you're in the center of the map. And so you really want to be hugging to a side, whether that's top side or bot side. So some good rules, and I'll explain this, like the reasoning in a little bit, is to just ward at 2 minutes 30 and at 4 minutes. And the reason for that is because your 2 minute 30 ward lasts for 90 seconds, so it'll last until 4 minutes, and then your 4 minute ward will last until about like 5:30 or 5:40 or something. So that's going to give you a lot of coverage for the early game. So just remember those timings: ward at 2:30 and ward at 4 minutes. Now, if you really want to optimize it, you can. I will say the most important thing is just, again, placing a ward and hugging to it. So like if you ward topside, make sure you're like hugging to that topside ward. And that's the most important thing. But if you want to optimize it, you can. So figuring out where the enemy jungler starts is really important. And generally that'll just be based off who leashed. Like if bot lane is late to lane, you just know that their jungler started bot side, right? Because they got a leash. They might solo start, which I'll come to in a sec. But let's assume that they started bot side. What you're going to do is you're going to hug topside by default. Because what's going to happen is that the jungler cannot be topside of you before 2 minutes 30. Unless they do something really crazy. So most likely, they will just be either doing their bot camps and then they will cross, or they will make a play in bot side river. Either way, if you hug the top and you ward top somewhere up here at around 2 minutes 30, you should never be gankable. And then your 4 minute ward, by that time the jungler probably will have reset and swapped back to bot. You swap to hugging here and you ward here, and that'll spot the jungler coming this. It is better if you can to ward the side that the jungler is going to, just so that you can spot them out, waste their time, collapse on them, and all those sorts of things. But again, if you just place the ward and hug to it, you'll probably be safe, even if it's on the wrong side. That's something really important. If they solo start, normally I just ward to the side my jungler is pathing to. So let's say they solo start Raptors. You don't know that for sure. If your jungler is pathing bot side, I would ward bot side, and that way you just have ultra safety on this side. So if you're too lazy, you didn't see where they start, or you're just not sure, that's a good thing to do. Another quick rule to help you with warding is to use pink wards to allow you to push your green wards further. So in the early game, you can only really drop wards in very shallow locations, like either in this bush or slightly out, or maybe at the end of this wall or whatever. It's hard to ward places like this because there are too many paths that they can come through. So generally, you only ward places like this once you have a pink ward. Once you have this vision down, you have your ping, and that allows you to push your green wards a bit further. That's really nice. And it also just gives you more coverage overall, gives you a bit more time to respond. So buying a pink, obviously don't int your base for it, but buying a pink can help you set up the early game, which is pretty nice. Another good rule for mid lane is, in general, try push before you move or ward or do anything really. If you can push the wave under the enemy turret, that means that 1, you're not going to miss any creeps when you roam or make a play, and 2, your opponent will be pinned to their turret and unable to follow, which means that even if you run into their jungler or whatever, you know that the enemy mid laner can't be there. You can make some sort of play, without pushing the wave. Like if a fight is happening right next to you in the river, then you can walk to that without pushing the wave, but you wouldn't want to, say, roam top lane with your wave in the middle, or even the next wave being like close to the turret. Like if you roam top and the next wave is like already at this tower, it's just like coming to lane, a lot of the time the enemy mid can just shove and like take plates, and this play might not even be worth it, even if it's successful. So make sure you pay a lot of attention to that next mid wave that's coming out of lane or out of base, and the earlier you can clear the wave, the quicker you can clear the wave, the better it is to do whatever it is you're going to do, like basing, warding, roaming, etc. It's all much better the more time you have, so the quicker you can push the wave, the better. So in mid-game as a mid laner, there's a couple key points. One is you kind of want to go side lane and keep up your CS, and the other is you really want to be at all the objective fights. So the rules I use is I try and push the side wave as far as I can without dying. So you kind of have to pay attention to like where your jungler is and like how much vision you have. But ideally, you push the wave all the way to the enemy turret. Obviously, that's not possible if you have no vision and your jungler is topside, because it's just too scary, right? But you want to push this as far as you can, again, without dying. If you can only push it to here, that's fine. And then you can either take jungle cams or you can collapse mid. Basically, you can do whatever you want after you shove this wave. But similar to the early game, you always want to shove that wave first. Another really important thing for the mid game is your TP usage. So TP gives you permission to side lane. A lot of people complain about their team fighting when they're on side lane, and especially in lower elos, that is going to happen. But it's a lot easier to manage if you have your TP up, because then if they do fight, you can always TP into it. And even if you decide not to TP, then you can just like keep going bot. So I really try and hold on to my TP for most of the mid game. I will TP if necessary, but I try and I guess realize that like holding your TP creates more pressure a lot of the time than actually using it, and will allow you to just like keep your farm up higher overall. So be a little careful with how you use that. And then yeah, if you are gonna group, you should try not to group with TP. You can group if TP is down, but if your TP is up, you should be inside. And another rule I like to use is try base around 1 minute before dragon spawns, just so that you've spent all your gold, everything basically, so that when the dragon spawns, you're back on the map, full HP, full mana, spent all your gold, and as strong as possible. So those are the most important things for mid in the mid game. One other just general rule that I think applies to every role, but especially mid, because there's a lot of like immobility and also you're very gankable. Be very careful when you're playing without flash. Like a lot of the time in mid, flash will mean a guaranteed death later on if you end up wasting it or burning it for whatever reason. So when you're going back and review and you're looking at your deaths or whatever, also look at when you lost your flash. And see if there's anything you can do to prevent that. And if you do lose your flash, just play a little safer. It doesn't mean just like stay under your turret and don't do anything, but just play a little bit safer. You know, like if you don't have vision, it can be really scary to push up. And yeah, just in general, be very aware that there's a massive target on your back if you end up losing your. So for recommending which champ you should play when you're auto-filled mid, I would highly recommend playing a champion from your main role in mid first. I will talk about some mid-specific picks, but for example, there are a lot of top laners and ADCs and even supports and junglers too that are all viable in mid, and I would highly recommend playing something that you are comfortable on. So some examples are like if you're a top laner, you know, you can easily play champs like Aurora, Garen, Cassante, Kennen, Rumble, Aatrox. There's a lot of top laners that work really, really well mid. If you're an AD carry, then something like Zeri or Lucian, or you can even play mid-gen at the moment. There's lots of options. For supports, it's definitely like a little more limited. You could play something like Karma or Lux. And junglers, there's plenty of junglers like Talia. You can honestly play mid Lee Sin, you can play Echo, you can play Talon. So there's plenty of options, and I would recommend that, especially if you play top lane champs mid, and there's a specific reason for that. So in solo queue, a lot of the time, the red side 5th pick will be the top laner, almost always, because the top lane counter pick is considered to be the most valuable. So what will happen is that on here, what will normally happen is the mid laner will pick and then the top laner will last pick. But if you if you blind pick a flex pick mid, so for example, if you pick Kennen here, right? Let's say we pick Kennen and this is mid Kennen. What's going to happen is that the enemy mid will blind something safe. Let's say they blind Ahri, and then they will go for their top counter. So let's say Aurelia. So not only do you not get countered mid because they're picking something as a safe blind, but also you potentially get your top laner a really, really good matchup, right? Like you get the Renekton into Aurelia, you get a completely fine matchup into Ahri, and that actually works out really, really well. So I recommend, especially for top laners, that you do play some sort of top laner mid, and try pick it here. It's also really good if you can ban a champ in your role. Like I'm not sure what all the like Kennen counters are, but like let's say it's like Jace, Aurelia or something. Ban one of those, and they're almost certainly going to think it's top, especially if you haven't swapped your pick. That's something that you can use. I think it's harder to do with the other roles because, you know, like you could do this with AD carry and give like your AD carry last pick, but it's going to be harder to convince your top laner to blind. And also I think ADC counter pick means a little bit less. But yeah, I think there's a lot you can do with flex picks, especially when you're off-rolled, to actually make the game a little more difficult for your opponent. If you do get autofilled mid though, and you want to play mid champs, the 3 champs I'd recommend are Ahri, Brand, and Diana for different reasons. So Ahri is very forgiving. It's very easy to have a lot of impact on, and even if you make mistakes, your mobility and sustain can allow you to get away with things. Brand is kind of a different approach, where Brand is the sort of champ that even if you int on will have a lot of impact. He does a lot of damage, and his game plan is very, very straightforward. So that's really useful. If you just think you're going to die a lot anyway, or you don't really know how to play, you can just kill a lot of creeps. Even if you die a lot and miss position, you'll still deal a lot of damage. And Diana is a bit more of a simplistic champ. There is some difficulty to Diana in some of the team fighting and skirmishing, which we'll have a look at. But Diana is a very stat check champ, sort of similar to Nefiri, except it's just a little more obvious, I think. So a lot of people might find it easy just to play a champ like Diana, and it might be more familiar to those of you who have played kind of like the melee carries and other roles, and just overall might be something that's like a little easier to pick up than some of the more niche mid lane picks. Let's start with Ahri. So most of the time on Ahri, you will be going Malignance and then either Horizon, Lichbane, or what's the other one? Horizon, Lichbane, or Liandry as your second item. And then you could be going Deathcap third. That's like your standard. If you're not sure, just go Malignance, Horizon, Deathcap every game, and you can't really go wrong. For your runes, you'll go Electrocute plus Sorcery or Electrocute plus Inspiration. Again, doesn't matter a whole lot. As long as you have Electrocute and Ultimate Hunter in your main setup, that's completely fine. So in the early game, most of the time as Ari, you're just looking to push waves. Obviously, it is a little bit dependent on the matchup, but you are kind of champ that wants to push and move, and you will generally get threat and pressure over your opponent just by attacking the wave as opposed to attacking them, right? Like, you're not super good at actually like trading, but you are really good at punishing people for lack of wave clear. You've got really good gank set up. Once you hit level 6, you're really good on the 2v2. So focus mainly on, again, like attacking the wave with the Q. You can look to trade back with stuff like your electrocute proc with W. Like, you can do auto W auto to proc electrocute early, which is quite nice. In some matchups like this one, you might need your charm in order to cancel a dash. But yeah, you're just generally looking to spam push the wave and then try not to interact so much directly with your opponent, because generally Ari will lose in straight up 1v1s. Your main goal really with the early game is just to survive the 1v1. Like, if you can get to the point where you get a bit of AP and you get a bit of mana, you get level 6, you're in a really, really good spot. The most important thing is do not die pre-6 on this champ. It's pretty much the only time you can die, before you get your ult, before you get enough AP that you can neutralize. So if you end up having to base at a slight deficit on your first base or buy some defensive items like this, it's completely fine. You just want to make sure get to that really important, team fighting and skirmishing stage. So we can probably just skim through this and go to some of our skirmishes. So when you get prior over mid as Ari, you really want to look to group up with your jungler and make plays. So, this time, I can actually move my cam a little bit for you guys. It's moving to the side that he has his jungler on and is going to make a play with the Kha'Zix, right? So you really want to get involved in plays like this. Use the fact that you have more wave clear than your opponent and try and make plays on the other lanes if possible. Be careful doing these sort of roams if you haven't pushed mid first. Like, you can see how he pushed mid wave before making this play. If you do this without pushing, it can be kind of rough. Yeah, it can be pretty scary. I think because you can end up, especially against a champ with higher wave clear, they can end up, taking your plates and just punishing you too hard for it. So this is, just quintessential Ari early game play. You just end up in a lot of fights and playing for 2v2s and stuff like that. And you should... Against lane bullies, you should expect to lose 1v1, but the thing, again, like, you have wave clear, you have gank set up, ability, you shouldn't really fall that far behind. So when you get into the mid game, it's mostly the same thing. You're still looking for kind of like these picks and skirmishes. You're not super strong on side lane. You can push the side wave, but the annoying thing about Ari on the side lane is that you can't really take turrets at any like reasonable pace, and you also can't take jungle camp. So generally, when you go side lane as Ari, if you have nothing else to do, obviously you will hit a tower like this, but you're typically going to look to push and then move. Something that's really, really important on Ari is definitely don't look for fights without ult, though. So like this fight, for example, like, he's pushing bot. He could collapse mid if he had ulti, but without ult, you're just really not that useful. So it's just better off that you push the side wave and then you start looking for plays again once you have ult. So like, here he has ult in 12 seconds. I think it's fine to start looking for mid. If he didn't have ult, though, I would say he would just keep going bot, because this champ is extremely ult reliant, and without it, you're kind of a bot. So yeah, just be a little bit careful of that. And then in team fights and skirmishes, like here, you have kind of two options. You can either play to peel your AD carry. If your AD carry is really strong, you can just play to like charm, bruises or whatever off your AD carry. But if your AD carry is a bit weaker, or they don't need peel, or you have diving champs, then you probably want to look to dive onto... It can be onto the back line, but honestly, it can just be onto anyone. Like, if your team lands some CC, like here, it's really good for you to be able to follow up, because you can guarantee the charm on someone that's already CC'd. And just make sure that you save a dash in order to get out. You can see there isn't willing to commit that last dash charge, because if you do overcommit with your dashes, you will be left with nowhere to go. And it's really important as Ari that you... I mean, like, the champ is kind of balanced around her safety. So if you find yourself dying a lot on Ari, you'll just end up too far behind to actually do anything. But if you play the team fights well, you should have very low deaths on this champ. And that also makes Darkseal very, very OP. Darkseal is just super efficient item in general, and it's really, really good on champs like Ari that aren't going to die a whole lot. Yeah, I think that's pretty much everything you need to play Ari. I think, yeah, it's pretty forgiving champ in general. And probably the things you're going to struggle with the most is like either playing 2 aggro pre-6 and then like having a random death, or just not playing around your ult. I think those are by far the biggest mistakes I see Ari players make. So As I said before, Brand is one of those champs that you can just have really high impact on, even if you're kind of running it down. The typical Brand build is to go Liandry, or sorry, is to go Riley and then Liandry, and then normally Blackfire can be Shadowed Flame, pretty much whatever. As long as you start with Riley, Liandry, and just buy AP items after that, it'll be fine. And your build, or for your runes, you'll generally go Comet Inspiration, although you can go Comet Precision if you like. But the most important thing is taking Comet and Scorch. And the reason for that is because the way your lane phase plays out on Brand is that you will, level 1, you'll poke with W, but once you get level 2, you're going to W the wave, and then you'll E off of it. And how that works is that if you burn the wave, it increases the spread range of your E. So like if you just W and then E, it's really, really difficult for people to stand up against the poke, and Brand is a super strong lane bully, while also being not super complex to play, right? So if you can obviously get like random poke like this, you should, but really you're just looking to just W the wave and then E off of it, and it'll be really, really hard. He's actually not doing it much. Maybe this isn't the best example. See if I can find a really good example here. Get him through. Yeah, so exactly like this. So you can see the E range is really, really big. So when you W the wave like this, normally you actually want to hold your E for a little bit. You can E instantly if your opponent's in the radius. If they're not, just hold the E a bit, because it'll actually just zone them off, and you can keep autoing the wave while they're like zoned off by you, I guess, just like having the threat of the E. It's also really, really important that you don't waste your mana too much. Like Brand doesn't really have mana problems in general, and he has a mana restore like on his passive. But be really careful throwing out random Qs and stuff like this. I think it's better just to save your mana for the WE poke rather than to use it like this. So your early game will pretty much just repeat like that over and over. You can see here, the wave starts coming, he W's it, he E's for poke off of it, and that'll poke Zeri a lot. It'll poke your Comet, your Scorch, and stuff like that. Some brands do put multiple points in E, so if you want to make life easier for yourself and not have to hit your W, you can do like 3 points E into W max, or you can even just do straight E max, and I think it's not bad. That's something you can definitely think about. It makes your, your laning phase super, super strong. And yeah, you'll normally be looking to rush either Liandry or Riley. I think Riley is better a lot of the time, but Liandry again is probably easier in the sense that it just guarantees that you do a lot of damage, and it also increases your wave clear. So you might just find it easier to rush Liandry, and then that makes, again, all the hard parts of Brand just like a little easier, which can be nice. And then when you come to like any kind of skirmish or team fight, it's pretty straightforward what you want to do on Brand. Pretty much you're just trying to ult and hit as many targets as possible. Just apply your AoE effects to everyone, pretty much. Yeah, there really isn't too much to it. Like, if you can hit your stuns and stuff, great. But honestly, if you get your ult off and your E off, you're basically guaranteed to top damage in a skirmish. So let's see if I can find an example here. Little team fight or something. He's got 2 items. Brand on the side lane is really no different from any other champ. Like, there's nothing special about it. I guess the one thing is that, like, you are immobile on the side lane, so you can definitely die to ganks, but you're very tanky because of all the extra health you build. And also, Riley's is just, like, a good item in general for kiting people out, so you should have no trouble on the side. And you can see the Riley's slow, very, very OP in team fights. But yeah, let's see if we can find a really big team fight example rather than these, like, kind of random skirmishes. This here is a pretty good example of a Brand team fight. Pretty much you just want to walk up and apply your burns to as many people as possible. You can see here, immediately poking with the E and Q to begin with. Wait for people to come a bit closer. One of the most important things is not to waste ult onto like someone with a Zhonya's or a spell shield or someone who's just like too far away from the fight. Because ult will add so much damage and so much easier to get all your passive procs. So especially on like these melee bruises and stuff, it's really good just to press ult. And even if you die at this point, you've basically top damage in the team fight anyway. So it's super, super easy after that. You can see the more melees, the better for Brand as well, just because it's so much easier to spread. And also like the Riley slow is super effective against them. So that's really nice as well. Brand is countered by ultra long range, but you won't see that in Soluki that often. When you verse some kind of comp that has like Jace top, some poke champ like Xerath mid, and then I don't know, like a Caitlyn or something 80 carry. It's not going to happen that often, and the more melees, the better. So that should be pretty much everything you need to play Brand. The final champ I'd recommend if you're off-rolled is Diana. So the Diana setup, there are 2. You can go for either Phase Rush plus like Sorcery or Precision. You can even go Phase Rush Resolve. Basically, Phase Rush plus anything is fine. This is really useful for getting short trades and then cutting out. If your matchup is really easy and you're just going to win trades all the time, you can go for Electrocute with Sudden Impact, and it does do a lot of damage. But I think a lot of the time you'll actually avoid more damage just by being able to kite away with Phase Rush. And we'll kind of see that with the trades. So generally what Diana does early in the lane is she just pokes with Q at level 1. It's quite hard to dodge Diana Q, so like if you time it well, it should be very, very difficult for your opponent to dodge it. And then once you get level 3 especially, that's when you really want to start looking for trades. You can also just spam push the wave early. The extra attack speed that Diana gets from her passive is quite nice just for shoving waves. And that can actually give you a little bit of breathing room. Generally, you don't want to shove as melee versus ranged, but Diana's actually just really tanky, and in easier matchups especially, it's really good to do this, because it just gives you way more control than you should normally have. But you're mainly playing for that level 3 spike. Once you get level 3 and you get a point in E, that's when you really want to start looking for trades with your opponent, and then using that phase rush to disengage before you end up taking a lot of damage. So you can see Diana's basically just like poking Smolder down, and then when cooldowns are used, goes in, procs the phase rush, and then is either able to chase with it if you think you can continue winning the trade, or is able just to run away from there, which is very, very valuable, having that flexibility. And once you get more points in Q especially, it'll be very, very difficult for champs, especially without sustain or without high movement speed, to be able to stand up to your constant Q pose. So just look for this over and over. The one thing to be careful of is that because you're a melee champ, you're very gankable, right? Like you're going to be pushed up far in the lane, and if you don't have a lot of vision or you don't know where their jungler is, that can be very risky. So make sure that you're remembering to drop wards at the right time. Any skirmishes that you can get involved in early as Diana are very good. This champ has very high stats, so you're just quite good at trading, you're quite good at fighting early, and you'll generally be better at that than other champions around you. So that's something that you can look for over and over. You can see it's just coming and setting up the vision. Now, if we go to team fights and skirmishes, I think that the most important thing is actually just choosing your moment and not going in too early. So, like Diana she is kind of like even though she's got DPS in her auto attack, she's too squishy to stay in the fight forever. So you kind of want to be going in, proccing your phase rush, getting your ult off, and then kind of kiting away. You really don't want to just be sticking around in the middle of 4 people. She's definitely not a bruiser. She is like more of an assassin. So let's see if we can find a good team fight example. I'll just skim through this, and then we'll come back to the side laning afterwards. Have a look at one of these team fights. Yeah, so like basically you don't want to go in too early. You can kind of see here, like you want to wait for some cooldowns to be used, and you want to like choose your moment a little bit. Going in like this, obviously, if you can get a kill, it's great. I would say this was actually a pretty big mistake though. Like this is kind of an example of what not to do. Goes in when there are too many cooldowns up and is just forced to immediately flash out. So be really careful of that. Like if he was healthy here and could re-engage when the cooldowns are down, that would be a really, really good time to go in. So yeah, just be cautious about going in too early. That's really the one big mistake you can make. But if you bide your time, the team fights are pretty easy. You can just dash onto people. If you get ult on multiple targets, then great. Even if you don't, then that's fine. But let's have a look at the mid game real quick. So generally in mid game, I mean, Diana is really, really strong on the side lane. You also push very quickly, take turrets quickly, take camps quickly. So spending a lot of time just shoving the side wave is a really, really good idea. The only thing to be careful of, again, is if you don't have the vision, you might need to be a little bit safer, right? But you can see with the phase rush is able to at least waste a little bit of their time, but is probably going to end up dying. So this here, like the mistake would be, if you look at the map, like Wukong, his jungler is topside, and he also has no vision bot, and he's playing very aggressively on the bot wave. So this is just playing too aggro at the wrong time. But this is the kind of thing you want to be doing. Like you do want to be pushing in the side lane. You want to be pressuring the turrets. You want to be like wasting their time. Just be, again, super careful when you're weak-sided. So like here, for example, his entire team is making a play top, and he is trying to push bot, even though he's ultra weak-sided. So be very, very careful of that. But yeah, that's pretty much Diana's goals all throughout the game. If you're not sure what to build, it's generally just like Lich Bane, and then either like Shadow Flame if you're really ahead. It can be Zonids if you need extra survivability. Into Deathcap, that'll pretty much be it. But yeah, the champ is like not super hard, so it should be pretty easy for you guys to pick up. Do I have any last thoughts on playing off-role mid? Not really. I think just make sure, if possible, that you play a champ from your other role. I think that's going to make it a lot easier. By far, the biggest, I guess, like issue when people play mid is the warding and stuff. Like if you die at the wrong time to a jungler in the early game, or you lose your flash randomly, that can really hurt. So just making sure you have like a really stable first 10 to 15 minutes, and then after that, you can probably play it sort of similarly to your main role. I think once you get to that point, you'll be fine. So just work on, setting up vision at the right time and, knowing when to play aggro and not. And I would recommend playing, a different champ in mid, but if you want to play one of the mid laners, these are the ones I'd recommend.
Alright everyone, moving on to AD carry, and I'm joined here today by Jinjo, who's been a challenger AD carry for forever, and he actually had a bootcamp with me in Korea back in the day. And yeah, I appreciate you being here. If you want to introduce yourself, feel free.
Thanks so much. Yeah, so we spent some time, Chippys and I were both playing professionally in OCE. And I actually moved to Europe to play professionally for the last 4 years. And now I'm back in Australia working on my individual coaching. And I've just started a website. So yeah, thanks for having me on the channel. And yeah, let's get into it.
So just to kick things off, are there any general rules or guidelines you'd give to somebody getting filled to AD carry? So like mid, top, jungle, doesn't matter. Just a baseline they can follow to have some success in the role.
Absolutely. So it kind of depends. The thing about bot lane that's different to other roles is that there's 4 players playing it. There's usually 2 AD carries and 2 supports. So at the start of the laning phase, it's really important to find out which players are more competent than others. Some players will usually be better than others, and it's very quick you'll be able to realize.
Yeah.
Through their positioning, through how they use their wards, through how they throw their skill shots. You can find out, for example, a Thresh player, if they're playing well or poorly quite quickly, because when the abilities connect, it's very rewarding, and when they don't, it's very punishing. So let's say I'm playing with a Thresh that's performing and hitting every single hook. We can look to increase the volatility of the laning phase. I can try to make it more volatile. I can try to fight, use my summoners to get an advantage. Whereas, let's say I'm playing with a Thresh that's missing a lot of hooks. Maybe we can try to play more passively, make sure we're farming efficiently, and wait for our teammates to come, our jungler to come, include our mid laner, and not try to play for that pure 2v2. Because when you're off-roll, the point you need to be looking at is to be balanced and stabilize the game rather than increase the volatility if it's too risky.
So you'd say into that lane with kind of a more reserved approach, feel it out before you just play super aggressive or super passive. Just see what everyone's going to do for a little bit. Chill back, stay high HP.
When you're off roll, no matter what the role, don't make the game about you. Figure out where you have your advantages and disadvantages, and try to play a 7 out of 10.
Yeah.
Try to play a solid game. You don't have to be a superstar, and you don't have to play super risky that you'll have a terrible game. Just do your job, and you'll usually get the win.
Yeah, so touching on what you said earlier, where bot lane's 4 people, I'd say from experience as well, the hardest part about playing bottom is playing with that other person, where especially with no voice comms, right? You don't know their level or anything like that, even if you feel it out. What would you do if you feel like they're underperforming in the sense where they're just sitting back behind you, maybe giving you a Janna shield every so often, but pretty much doing nothing? How do you play out your lane in that sort of situation?
Yeah, so more often than not, if you're playing with a player that plays under aggressive or too passive, usually they're playing a champion that functions through scaling. So champions like Sonar, Janna, Seraphine, and these champions have huge payoffs once they've completed their items, but can be terribly weak during laning phase. So the important part is to not lose sight of how their champion functions in the game. If they're sitting behind you and they're not really helping you out, and maybe you're down 20 CS to the enemy AD carry, you have to think, well, maybe the enemy team has a Thresh and I have a Seraphine. Is 20 CS enough for this Ashe to outvalue me later? If the answer is yes, maybe you have to play more volatile, more risky. But more often than not, the answer is no. What that means is try to get as much CS as you can, but if your support's too far away, you'll be trading 1 versus 2. Which means you'll get to a point with your HP bar and resource, or maybe wave state where your jungler's not helping you as well, where you're going to need to recall and you're going to lose minions.
Yeah.
Almost always it's better to take the bad recall, lose some minions, but not die, especially when you're outscaling your opponent.
So you'd say it's better to give farm and stay high HP and just put a little bit of trust into support to scale up later on than to try to play aggressive and make them play aggressive and try to make them mimic your gameplay. Okay.
Absolutely. And on the other hand, maybe you play with a support that's too aggressive.
Yeah.
Let's say you're not playing with the Janna, the Scalers anymore. Let's say you're playing with the Pikes, the Blitzcranks, the Threshers, the players that like to make that action early game. The important part is you have to show them that you trust them. So when they go in for a big play and maybe they're playing too risky, you should try to follow up on their play and you should try to get the best outcome possible. But sometimes they'll be going too far, and it's important that you value your life higher. If they're going in and they're going to die, it's okay as long as you catch the full wave. It can sometimes even be beneficial because you'll get two persons worth of XP in one.
Yeah.
The pike dies, you catch the whole wave by yourself. It's great for you. But the important part is you don't want to make your teammate frustrated by not following up on what they think is a good play. So it's a bit harder in that regard because you have to balance taking risks to make sure that your teammate's happy with your performance, and sometimes it'll pay off great. Sometimes they'll take a too risky decision and you have to know when it's time to leave.
So it's like posture up and kind of be in the area to help them if it looks good, but never just fully commit or fully disengage if they go in.
Absolutely. You have to take the risk reward into consideration. Maybe the jungler's coming, maybe your support goes in and you know, hey, even if I fight this out, chances are we're both going to die.
Yeah.
You say, hey man, I'm sorry, the jungler was here, I thought it was too risky. And hopefully you can keep playing the game out.
Alright, sounds good. I'd say, other than lane, I feel like lane might be a part people struggle with, but especially the mid game. Because I would say out of all 5 roles, AD carry has the least agency. I don't know if you would agree with that, but the other roles have some sort of way to make plays, especially the champions they pick, right? So what would you say, especially when to swap in the mid game? What are you looking to do when your lane phase is ended, and when do you actually swap to mid?
Yeah, it's a good question. So for AD carry and support, usually just before plates run out is when you should swap to mid lane. So plates run out at 14 minutes, and usually the best AD carries in the world will swap anywhere between the 13 and 13:30 minute mark. If you're a little bit late to mid lane, usually it's not a huge problem. But the reason why you want to get there before 14 minutes is that it allows yourself and your team to get the correct lane assignment without losing a tower. So let's say you're trying to go mid lane and you have to send someone bot lane. You want to make sure during that period of time that you're fixing the lane assignment that the towers are fortified. So maybe someone only gets 1 plate. They don't break the full tower and then you lose the first bonus gold.
Oh, so don't worry
Now,
about
the
the
reason
plates
you
as
wanna
much. You mainly care about the tower more than the platings?
Absolutely.
Interesting.
Because once you get into mid game, even if someone gets that 1 plate, maybe you get that extra damage on the mid tower. And because the mid tower is the most central part of the map, if you break that, you have access to take a more risky path to side lanes, to jungle, to objectives. You have way more options. Whereas that 100 plus gold from the plate, it's going to be the same no matter what.
Yeah. So once you're in the mid lane, what are you thinking once you're in that position? Because that's when you can get attacked from every single angle. So what's going through your mind once you're there?
So my advice to off-roll AD carries, even on-roll AD carries, would be to find a safe side of mid lane. So usually, depending on where your jungler is on the map, you want to place down some safe vision so that you have a way to retreat from the mid lane wave.
So you're picking up pinks yourself to get your own wards, or do you have to just hope your support knows what he's doing?
Yeah, so as AD carry, it's very rare that I'll buy pink wards. But when I do buy a pink ward, I'll place it in a very safe position so it doesn't get killed, meaning that I don't have to repurchase a new one. So for example, let's say you're on red side and there's the mid lane bush on the left-hand side of mid lane, and then there's raptors, red side raptors. Now, a pink ward in between those is hard for that blue side team to kill, and it provides you safety in which way you can retreat from the mid lane wave.
And so you just want to make yourself an escape route pretty much when you're clearing the wave.
Absolutely. You want to have a clear escape route. And when it comes to champions that are great at engaging, such as a Jarvan, you want to try to keep your flash matched with him. Let's say this Jarvan goes absolutely crazy and he flash EQ ults you. You're going to have to use your flash more often than not.
Yeah,
but that's okay because your flash will usually come back up when Jarvan's flash will come back up. Meaning that the distance you have to stand between each other, it's more easy to space and tether him, if you know what I mean.
So you kind of recommend marking key abilities in your mind to use flash on instead of just using it for a kill or just, to live randomly without a major spell being baited?
Absolutely.
All right.
It's important that you're ready to use your flash at the important moments of the game, such as at an objective or when a character has a huge shutdown. Use your flash at the important moments.
Makes sense. So another point in the mid game, when you get prio on a top laner inside, you have a lot of options, right? You can maybe bully them under tower, you can rotate mid 5v4. But what do you do with an AD carries priority? So let's say you did pretty well, you push mid. What are you trying to do there?
So I'll go back to laning phase quickly.
Yep.
So if you have priority in laning phase, it usually means you have the option to slow push. You have the option to build a couple of waves, crash them together, and then you have this big timer to do something. Now, what are your options if it's during laning phase? You have the option to hit the dragon. You have the option to invade the enemy jungler. You have the option to dive. You have the option to recall. You have 4 options there, all of which can be good depending on the context. Now, once you get into the mid lane state, then you want to push the wave if you can and move towards the side lane. You usually want to move towards the side lane where your jungler is, where the objective is, or the objective your team's looking to capture. And you want to move towards your side laner that requires the most resources. For example, Dragon's coming up and your solo laners are Ornn and Yasuo. It takes time for the enemy team to kill Ornn, and whether he has plus or minus 500 gold from dying or getting a kill, it doesn't really change the rate of his snowball the same way as if a Yasuo gets behind.
Definitely.
I'm sure you've all seen it in your games. Usually they end feed.
Yeah.
However, if Yasuo gets ahead, he usually positively snowballs and is able to carry the game. The point is, once you've pushed mid lane, move towards the side lane with the objective and towards the champion that needs help. If you're unsafe to do so, wait for your jungler.
So only move if you know you're 100% safe, and if not, just hide in fog of war. Wait for your team to sort of bait you a little bit.
Absolutely, and you can still move, but take a safer path.
Yeah.
For example, you can path through river when you have the correct information that you won't get punished. If you don't have that information, you can still move towards the side lane, but take the safe route through your jungle.
Awesome. I'd say that's about wraps it up for mid game. In terms of champions specifically, what would you recommend for the average off-role player trying to play AD carry and not just being, you try to hit a 7 out of 10 like you said before, how do we get from a 5 out of 10 doing nothing to actually contributing? What champs are best for that?
Absolutely. So it depends on what your strongest role is. There are some replicatable concepts that will allow you to impact the game more heavily. Let me explain. A jungler may have less lane understanding than that of a mid or a top laner that's off-role. So champions that are more macro or map oriented, such as Ashe, using the hawkshot to track the enemy jungle for their teammates. They know the timer in which the full clears have been done, the 3 camp timers have been done. They know when to use hawkshot because they're keeping track of where the enemy jungler and their jungler is, because that's how they view League of Legends best. Mid lane, however, may have more experience with mages, so champions like Seraphine or Ziggs may make more sense to their in-game view of how to win the game from a mid lane perspective, and in this game, in the hands of a bot lane.
So that sounds good for the mid and the jungle players, but what about top laners? Because apart from this meta with Zeri and stuff running around, not really any champions or skill sets that can translate. So what do you recommend for top and support? But I'd say mainly top.
So the issue is, top laners, it's not so obvious depending on the metas that they play range champions. Sometimes Cannon is strong, sometimes Vayne top is strong, and those top lane players, they usually have a great grasp of how to play AD carry just because they've played the laning phases before. So let's say for a champion or a player that plays purely top lane champions, let's say that Melee, Fighter, Darius, Renekton, champions like that. I would give them the most simple inputs for kiting, such as champions like Misfortune, Ashe, and Jinx. They have higher movement speed, either with the Jinx passive or Misfortune passive, and Ashe has the movement speed advantage from her slow and usually taking approach velocity and runes.
Yeah, so
These champions are simple to pilot.
Mainly champs with high ease of execution. Not really any skills that translate. Yeah, just champs that can always have value, but easy to pilot. Makes sense.
Definitely. And it's very simple. It's not so much about weaving so many spells in between. It's more about being a pure auto attacker. So that now that you're changing your skill set, the most important thing is to worry about your distance from the threat and inputting your auto spacing correctly. These champions are simple to pilot. They have high range and strong laning phases, which allow for mistakes in lane that won't cost the entire game, unlike if you're off-roll picking a champion like Draven, which makes the game completely about you and can be extremely risky.
Yeah. So let's say we're a top or a jungler, we've picked Ashe. How does winning the game look for us in that case? Like when do we spike? What are we looking to do? How do we close out?
So the important part about when you're playing Ashe is to maintain your lane dominance. So try to get a high CS per minute, usually around 8, 9, or 10, depending on your elo bracket. And try to use your hawk shot consistently to give your teammates information so that they can play their lanes more aggressively or passively, depending on their context. So when you're off-roll, it's about influencing the whole game state more positively. It's not about getting the lead yourself and carrying. Give your teammates a chance to perform on their roles, on their main roles. So champions like Ashe have the utility through the hawk shot, and they have some CC through their ult to decide, hey, it's a good time to fight, and I know that, so let me shoot an arrow, and let me help my teammates carry.
So when do you spike on Ashe? When do you feel like now I'm strong? Because AD carries, especially pre-1 item, pretty weak, especially from a top laner perspective. When do you actually feel strong on that champ?
So AD carries usually have a couple of main spikes. The first one is getting tier 2 boots. When Ashe has Berserker Greaves, and the enemy AD carry does not match the Berserker Greaves, usually Ashe is in a very strong spot. Because she has the movement speed advantage with her slow and approach velocity, it's very easy for her to space her opponents and get some orders in when they can't even order her back. So these movement speed advantages are really important for AD carry. Now, other times where AD carry spikes really hard is when crit items stack, because you get a certain amount of crit chance per item. So on the first item completion, you're decently strong. On the second one, you're getting even stronger. Once you have close to that 75 to 100% crit, that's when you're really strong. So AD carry is usually about scaling, so don't feel super pressured in the early game if you're not getting solid kills and you're not outputting a ton of damage. When you're off-roll, focus on playing safe and wait for your item spikes to do a lot of damage in the team fights.
So you'd say mainly Berserker Greaves and then 2 to 3 items once you start getting more crit?
Yeah, usually on the first item completion, you're quite strong, but in relativity to other roles, you're going to need that extra crit chance to start doing serious
If you're Kraken
damage.
versus Eclipse Aatrox, you're going to get rolled. But yeah, 2 to 3 items.
Good
That
luck.
starts to make
Good
sense,
luck,
yeah.
brother.
So would you rush Berserker Greaves since you rate it so highly on all 3 of those champs?
It depends on the matchup, but as a general rule of thumb, on champions like Ashe and Jinx, absolutely. On Misfortune, I'd recommend taking free boots and rushing Bloodthirster. So magical footwear in the inspiration tree, and then looking to rush the Bloodthirster, and you have almost infinite sustain.
Alright, so the general plan on Ashe is poke down your lane, get vision for your team, and come online later on. What about for Misfortune? Because you don't have that same utility. So what do you provide as her to be useful?
So Misfortune has a great ultimate, and it's really important that you're very patient with when you use that. So Misfortune has a great laning phase. She usually buys lifesteal early, which not a lot of AD carries right now have access to. So Misfortune can trade heavily and then lifesteal up off the wave and then have a huge HP advantage over her opponent. So Misfortune is great in the team fights, waiting for the CC to come down and then throwing out her ultimate, being careful to not do it too early. And in the other hand, she has a super fantastic laning phase, and she scales well into the game with crit.
Yep. So do well in your lane, get your Vamp Scepter early, and then in team fights, making sure we're holding, waiting for our Nautilus ulti, Jarvan, whatever we got on our team. Makes sense.
Absolutely, and waiting for enemy team to use their escape spells. Because Misfortune can single-handedly win or lose your team the game with her ultimate.
Yep. Alright, what about for Jinx, our final champ?
So the main goal for Jinx is to have a stable early game. She's not quite as strong in lane as the Ashe and the Misfortune, but she scales like an absolute monster. So the important part about Jinx is to be mindful of using your traps and your W, which is her zap. You want to use those spells off CC. And Jinx usually takes fleet footwork. So using that fleet footwork to get some extra healing procs off the jungle camps. Let's say you can't touch your lane or you're getting low in HP, just run over to that Gromp or those Golems and just hit it a couple times when you have the Fleet proc to get that extra efficiency of HP back. So
Interesting.
scaling up, being careful, and then into the late game starting to put out some serious damage.
Yep, so same as MF, you want to hold on to your major spells, wait for CC to chain with.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can look around with Ash, and you can look around with Jinx for these cross-map rockets, cross-map arrows, in timers where maybe you're not under that much threat, and it could
Yeah.
be a huge benefit to your team.
So only fire them out if there's not much action happening bottom.
Absolutely, and I wouldn't recommend it for the early first timers on the
Yeah,
off rolls.
for sure.
Get
Not
some
shooting that thing
serious
top.
practice in first.
Yeah. Alright, that should basically wrap it up. Do you have any final kind of points that you feel like a main takeaway? Just something to keep in mind as you're queuing up and getting plopped onto AD carry?
Absolutely. The main thing I would say is don't panic. When you start playing the laning phase, it doesn't matter if you don't have all the right information. The first thing to recognize are my teammates, is my support playing well? Is the enemy bot lane playing well? And what's my job this game? Where does my champion fit in? What ability should I be scared of? When should I be playing aggressive? And try to set up some conditional statements so it's much easier for you to play. If Thresh uses his hook, then I'm going to throw my Ash arrow and stun him and we'll kill him because he can't proc his aftershock.
Yeah.
Provided his spells are down, as an example. If you're playing champions like Misfortune, wait for the CC before you throw your ulti. Be patient. Wait for your teammates to help you out and provide information to your teammates so that they can carry through using their advantages on roll.
Alright everyone, we're going to be going through how to autofill, how to get by and perform well as a support. So I'm joined here by Cupcake. If you can introduce yourself.
Hey, Coach Chippys, very nice for you to have this conversation with me. I'm excited to spread the word of support to your students. I have been coaching support full time for 3 years. I've played professionally for about 3 years. I've coached some pro teams as well. So I'm very dedicated to the game, to the role of support, and to coaching. So can't wait to get into it with you.
Perfect. I appreciate you taking the time. For our first question, just if somebody gets filled into support, let's imagine they're top, mid, it doesn't matter. What's some general guidelines and rules you'd give them to follow? Because a lot of people are completely lost on the role.
Yeah, so the way that I think that you should approach like learning a role, I think it needs to be champion first. So I'm not sure this applies to top as much, but support is like a very fluid role. The way that you're going to approach a game as an Alistair or a Zyra or a Bard or a Nami is all completely different, right? So I would first encourage choosing a champion. And if these are off role or even secondary roles, you want to make sure that it's an easy to execute champion and it's just one champion. But first of all, you need to understand like your champion's identity and what you want to do with that champion. I just wanted to really emphasize champion first before like fundamentals and stuff.
Yep.
But apart from the champion first, I think just like general skills that you need to be aware of to play support is wave states. You need to understand what wave state you want. Of course, that's going to be different for what champion you have, but you need to understand like what a freeze is, why you would want to freeze, why you would want to maintain the shove. And yeah, I think that's like pretty much the core skill that you need to have in the early game.
Yep.
I know that people might be wondering about roaming and warding and stuff, but
Definitely.
I think that roaming, like this is going to be heavily dependent on your champion. Riot has been making it harder and harder to roam as a support nowadays. So if you're playing a lane dominant champion, you're barely going to be roaming at all in the entire game. And in the lower elos, it's not as much of a important skill than being able to lane properly and understand your champion's identity. So I think what do you think about the idea of champion first? Because that's just going to dictate which direction we go here. Because
Definitely,
like
yeah.
how you would play one champ versus another is just completely different.
So you think it's less about general support principles and more so about being really good at a specific champion? Because if you're getting autofilled, it's pretty rare. Probably you get support, 1 in 10, 1 in 15. So you don't need more than one champ. I'd still like to go through a couple just so they have options. So they don't only have to play one. But what would be the first champion you'd recommend for, another role player trying to get by as support?
Yeah, so the way that I approach it, if you are maining support, is you just stay away from the toughest champions.
Yeah.
I think support has a pretty low barrier for entry, and I like to emphasize enjoyment as much as possible. So the champions that I recommend you stay away from: Bard, Pike, Rakan, Thresh, Tarm.
Yeah,
I'm going to chuck Yumi in there as well. That's not going to help you learn.
definitely.
But if you're off roll or filled, then we would probably want to find as simple of a champion as possible. And I think the lowest skill floor is going to be Enchanters. Like, to be able to just get by, as you said, Enchanters is going to be the easiest for that. They're also going to have one of the highest skill ceilings, but you don't really need to approach that in order to do your job.
What
So,
would be
I
the
mean,
main enchanter? Because there's quite a few options in there. You know, a champion like Nami is more lane focused, where a champ like Lulu and Janna, you can still lane, but it's more chill and scaling, right? What would you recommend generally?
yeah, so I think it's important to be blindable, the champion that you do choose. So as long as it's not Lulu or Janna or Morgana or Milio, champions that like are quite niche and specific to certain situations, then it's just whatever. You can play Sona, incredibly easy to execute. Seraphine, very forgiving. Soraka, Nami, very blindable. It's very simple to understand what you should look to do throughout the game on those champions. So it's like, choose what you're drawn to, right? Like, which kit jumps out to you the most.
Yeah.
And if you have that level of enjoyment, then you're going to have a little bit more motivation, and you're going to probably learn a little bit more on those champions.
Perfect. So if we were to use one as an example, how would winning the game be on that champion? Say you build up some mastery, you know how to lane to a decent level, use your spells well. How do we do well in our lane and translate it to the rest of the game? Because I'd say laning, especially for top and mid laners, it's probably the easier part of playing support. But once laning phase is done, you have to be getting vision, moving with your jungler, all that stuff. How would you try to visualize for a player that's uncomfortable with that to have value? Because especially as an enchanter, it's quite hard to get vision by yourself at times.
Yeah.
So what would you recommend
sure.
for that?
There are going to be slight differences for each champion, but I'll try to generalize as much as possible. So let's just say a generic, slow, immobile scaling enchanter like Seraphine or Sona or Nami. In the mid to late game, there are some core concepts, and the first is mid first. So understanding how important the middle of the map is in the mid to late game, getting prio in mid with your ADC, getting a ward mid, and then once you have gotten mid first, then you look to do something else.
Yeah.
If you're just kind of floating around the whole time, you're not going to have number advantages to fights. You're not going to have safety to get vision with your teammates. You're just going to be hoping for the best and hope you get carried. So mid first, pressure with your jungler is a very important one as well. So like you said, it's hard to face check as an enchanter or just support in general. So when your jungler is pressuring the map, you want to be there with them. So ideally, you're on the same side of the map as your jungler. Then you're linking up, and then you're on the same side of the map as your jungler after you've gotten mid first, and then you can go and get a fight, get vision control, do an objective, whatever you want.
Perfect. So try to help your team get pushed without your ADC dying, and then vision on Dragon, Herald, whatever's spawning next probably, right? Mainly the objective you want.
Yeah, I don't think we need to place too much emphasis on the vision control aspect. I think solo queue is a very chaotic and fast-paced game, and it's most likely that there's just going to be action that you can go and help out a fight. Like, I think you really want to be bloodthirsty as a support. Support is a role that is just, it's not tied to anything, right? You don't have to worry about minions or camps. Like, you want to be there for action because your teammates aren't always going to be there. So just go be a bloodhound, go sniff out some action with your teammates, and while you're there, you can drop some wards, but I wouldn't emphasize the vision too much, actually.
That's good advice. So you're saying don't just go into it, oh, my job's warding, I have to get all this vision down. Mainly look for skirmishing and fights and being there first, and then the vision's just something you do on the way type of thing, like an afterthought.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you have to have like a rough idea of, placing a ward in an area that you would want vision in, but it's not like your number one priority is kill people, which is a pretty fun learning objective to have, I would say.
That's awesome. So generally on enchanters, that makes sense, but how would it differ if you were to try to recommend an engaged support to play? Because especially, from my point of view, top laners and junglers, we don't want to play Lulu and sit 2 screens away. We want to, of course, that's not how you play Lulu, but we want to be getting stuck in and engaging. So what's one that you'd recommend that's pretty easy to execute, but you can still, get stuff started.
Yeah, so the difficulty from engagers comes from it's more cerebral. Like it's not hard to land an Alistair combo or to press R on Nautilus, but it is hard to do that when your teammates are in position to follow up and when the enemies are out of position and when everyone has cooldowns. But I suppose the most easy to execute, the most forgiving engagers would be Nautilus and Leona, I would say. But again, you're going to need to develop the skill of engaging. And if that's something that you have picked up through top, it's probably going to have to be through kind of a filtered lens now that you're a lot squishier than you're used to. So you're going to have to be a little bit more precise with when you do and when you don't engage.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's just, you're going to have to ask yourself. I think the main question is, are they out of position or not?
Yeah.
You have to be patient but precise with when you pull the trigger.
What would you say your main, so Nautilus, Leon are good examples. What's your main goal in team fights? Like, of course, you can hit that dream hook onto AD carry. It goes without saying, but there are going to be some differences, right? Sometimes you might want to play to peel off the assassins or dive AD carry. What's kind of an easier way you teach where people can know their role? Because you don't want to dive on the AD carry if there's 0-5 and you got the 5-0 jinx, right? So what's the kind of a simple way you could teach that?
Yeah, I would say don't team fight. Your role is not designed for team fighting. You should be setting up picks. You should be, pushing them off the mid wave. You should be finding picks around the middle of the map. You should be collapsing onto skirmish opportunities. I think that's maybe a concept that people have in their minds, but I'm not sure what the games look like for you or for your students. But I very, very rarely see just a 5v5 handshake fight.
Yeah.
There's, constant chaos breaking out all over the map, and I think just embrace that. Cause chaos, cause volatility. Don't just sit back and allow an ARAM to happen, and then you're going to have the most success. Because engagers are just inherently bad in front-to-back team fights because their front is going to prevent you from accessing their back, right? But if you are in that situation, you've made a mistake, but you may as well try to be creative and find a flank opportunity. Try to find a pocket of fog, try to be a little bit cheeky, and find access to the carries.
Awesome. So yeah, I feel like this is going to help a lot because a lot of people's picture of support is get all their vision down, get that nice perfect 5v5, peel your backline. But you're saying it's more about being really fast around the map and getting creative skirmishes and plays done before that can happen, right? So you don't have to rely on your teammates for that 5v5 type of play because support, you can be impactful in team fights, of course, but you're not going to carry it. You don't bring that damage, so that makes a lot of sense.
Especially on engagers,
Yeah. And how often are you buying, what do you recommend for the newer players to buy pinks? Is it like 2 every base? You don't want to spend too much gold, but what do you advise for that?
Yeah, never 2 on a base. I strongly dislike having too much gold invested on the pink. So it's generally going to be just making sure that you have 1 pink on the map. I'm not sure we want to put too much attention onto how to place pinks. I think there are bigger priorities, but the idea is that you don't want, you want your pink to be useful, but not too far up that it gets cleared immediately.
Yeah.
So maybe if you find your pinks just disappearing constantly on the map, have a quick think about, maybe bringing it back a little bit and keeping it on the edge of your control.
Yeah.
But yeah, just 1 pink on the map.
Just 1? Okay, makes sense. And you're probably going to hate this question, but a couple of students did ask me, what do you do in a game where you're just not on the same page with your AD carry and he's having a tough game, right? He's getting hit by every hook and 0-2, 0-3. What would you do in that, or recommend that somebody do in that situation?
Yeah, I can imagine that this is a complete 180 from what top laners are used to, just living on islands up there by themselves.
1v1.
So we're constantly interacting with an ADC as a support, and this is where my ace mentality comes into play. You can't control your teammates, but you can absolutely influence them. And so what my ace mentality stands for is A is acknowledge the best play, C is communicate, and then E is embrace reality. So you got to know what you need to do. You got to acknowledge that. You got to communicate it with your pings and your body language, and then you got to embrace reality. Whatever happens, you adapt in the moment as well as you can. You don't just stubbornly commit to a play if you're not on the same page.
Makes sense.
So just understand that you can't control them, maybe managing your expectations a little bit. But I mean, this is something that I teach all of my students as soon as they come in, is that you're probably not doing ace mentality. I have full confidence that they're not communicating clearly and in advance with pings and with body language. And if you do that well, then you'll be surprised at how often people are going to be on the same page as you.
Yeah, I see something similar for top with your jungle. I don't have a cool acronym, but pretty similar where you gotta accept the reality when they're not following you up, but definitely.
Yeah.
Would you roam more if your AD carry's underperforming, or does it depend on the champion again? Back to the basics.
It's going to depend on a lot, and it is one of those things is going to be champion. I suppose another is just going to be the matchup, but I would say probably not nowadays. I think it's too much of an investment to leave bot. I would say, like once you have your tier 2 boots, then you can consider being a little bit more fluid on the map. But it's not just like your ADC is losing, so you leave, because that's going to allow the enemy ADC and the enemy bot lane to get uncontestedly fed, right?
Yeah.
So you still got to pick and choose your moment. But I think that's a really hard question to generalize with no champ and no VOD.
Yeah, makes sense. How would you advise playing for Void Grubs? Because roaming up for grubs is pretty common from supports nowadays. Is it something that they should be looking to do when they're entering the Rift, especially on engaged supports? Or do you feel like it's not worth trading off your ADC generally?
So I'm going to approach it from the lens of an off-rolling support again. Probably don't roam until you have your tier 2 boots, because you have to be very precise with your roams if you don't move very quickly. So just try to win lane as hard as possible in a 2v2 setting until you have your tier 2 boots. And then when you do have your tier 2 boots, then you're going to be a lot more fluid on the map and linking up with your jungler and pressuring around your mid laner and injecting volatility and finding picks.
Would you say delaying recalls till tier 2 boots or playing for them as a first recall is a good strat? Because in top lane, there's a lot of matchups where, like Darius, you want to wait till tier 2s if you can, stuff like that. Is it similar for support then?
Unfortunately, supports are living on welfare, so we don't really get to just get tier 2 boots when we want. So a lot of the time there's going to be a first purchase is like Ruby Crystal and tier 1 boots, and then it depends what boots you're going for, but eventually you're going to rush tier 2 boots.
Yeah.
It's going to be slow, but we'll get there.
One day.
Yeah.
But normally around level 6, if you can get tier 2 second recall, something like that, that's ideal.
Sounds about right. Yeah, it's normally around like 7-8 minutes in the game. You'll probably have tier 2 boots most of the time.
Perfect.
And then that'll be, I guess, second grubs.
Awesome. And just to wrap it up, how would you say, what does winning the game look like? We'll do one Enchanter ones, engage again, but we're keeping our AD carry alive now. We're getting a mid push. We're looking for skirmishing. How do we close out the game? Let's say we'll start with Enchanter. How are we ending the game on Nami? If we're playing what's it look like?
I just want to address that one comment from you, keeping ADCs alive. We are relentless. We're bloodthirsty. We kill people. We win lane. So it's not just about sitting back and peeling. Definitely. But as an Enchanter, the winning a game is going to be dominating laning phase, and then in the mid to late game, playing for mid first, linking up with your jungler, and then just having a rough idea of how you want to use your spells. It's going to be pretty easy on a champion like Nami, right? Just press W and E, and it's not really that hard. It can't really go wrong too much.
Yeah.
But it's a lot about doing the right things, however simple they are, and not face checking and not skipping steps.
Yeah.
As far as mid to late games go, it's very simple for a champion like that.
So it's mainly around skirmishing and team fighting consistently. Good spell usage, not getting blown up, stuff like that. And then the win will come. Okay.
Yep, and the playing for mid first is going to give you a bit of a strategic advantage. So it's not just hope for the best in 5v5s.
Yeah. I ask because for top, there's a lot of strats you can do, like pushing in bottom, make someone react, force a Baron, stuff like that on a champ like Yone or Gwen. But you feel like on support, of course, you can't do stuff like that. That's mainly around skirmishing really well. And just being there.
Right. For an Enchanter, you're immobile, right? So you don't have as much agency to influence the side of the map. So our options are pretty limited, and we're going to really embrace our strength around the middle of the map typically.
Awesome. And what about for the engaged supports then? Let's say you're playing Nautilus. How are we closing this one out?
It's tricky.
Yeah.
Nautilus is quite punishing. In a way, he really needs to accelerate the game. So you need to embrace Nautilus's identity that he is the king of getting prio 2v2 in the mid lane. Like if you see an enemy on your screen 2v2, just fight, just kill them. Otherwise, you're going to be using that pressure that you've generated to then shift into fog and actively set up picks a lot more.
Yeah.
You're going to, use your sweeper, get a pink, go kill someone with your jungler, rather than just, grouping up and looking for a 3v3 or a 4v4. But, try to avoid those even numbered team fights as Nautilus.
So look to attack them on mid if they're out of position. If not, hunt for the jungler or attack that top laner that's overextended, something like that.
Yeah, something like that, definitely.
Perfect. Before we go, do you have any final thoughts or kind of some advice for anyone that's a little bit overwhelmed with the role?
A little bit what with the role, sorry?
Overwhelmed, sorry.
A little bit overwhelmed. Yeah, just understand, just pick one champion and try to get a feel for what that champion does. Maybe my YouTube content for a champion guy could help you just get a really general outline of them, and then just try to not complicate it too much, just do the right things. And I guess if you're off role or you're filled, then you'd be happy just kind of going 50-50, right? You don't have to be an absolute smurf and psycho carry the game 1v9. Just do your job and have confidence that that's what you're there for, I guess.
All right, thank you for that. Awesome. We'll wrap it up there. All right, everyone, that's it for now. Congrats if you made it this far. I'm guessing this video turned out to be a pretty long one. And huge thanks to every single one of the coaches and players that helped me make this video. I really appreciate it. I think they did a great job. I really like watching what they gave me. And I've put a link in the description to all of their coaching, their YouTubes, everything like that. So feel free to check it out, especially if you have interest in those roles. They are all players that have hit rank 1, high season challenger for many years. So they're going to be able to teach you a lot on those roles. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you all next time.